Our story tonight takes us to the medieval empire between the Alps and Kiffiusa. On 10 June 1190, beneath the hot mountains of Cilicia, Emperor Frederick Barbarossa approached the Saleph River with the army of the Third Crusade. For nearly 4 decades, he had traveled between German courts, Italian cities, papal ceremonies, and battlefields, until one sudden drowning turned a living ruler into an absence around which legends gathered. At Frankfurt, on 4 March 1152, princes arrive amid the winter roads. You are standing near the crowded courtyard, where horses breathe pale clouds and leather tack creaks beneath damp cloaks. The walls of Frankfurt rise quietly through the grey morning, while servants move between carts, stables, kitchens, and guarded chambers. Around you, the leading princes of the empire gather after the death of Conrad III, each bringing his household, grievances, and hopes for the next king. Rain has softened the ground into deep brown ruts, and every passing rider leaves a slow impression behind. Smoke drifts from a travelling hall, carrying the scent of wet wool, rushes, and wood ash. In the chapel, a small flame bends whenever the door opens. Beyond the courtyard, bells mark the hours with a patient bronze voice, and the sound settles over Frankfurt like a veil. Among the assembled nobles, Frederick of Staufen appears as a young man with an unusual mixture of family claims and political usefulness. You see him moving through the household of his late uncle Conrad III, neither an unknown claimant nor a ruler so powerful that every rival must fear him. Frederick was born around 1122 into the Staufen dynasty, a family whose fortunes had risen through difficult contests between imperial authority and princely independence. Before becoming king, he had been Duke of Swabia, holding the title from 1147 to 1152. His position gave him rank, experience, and a following, yet his importance rested equally upon his connections with other houses. His mother was related to the Welf family, and his cousin Henry the Lion stood among the most influential men of the German lands. Henry became an important supporter of the settlement that brought Frederick to the throne. Around them, rival aristocratic interests found a temporary bridge, narrow but strong enough to carry a kingdom. The cold air presses gently against your face as you wait beside the stable entrance. Rain gathers along the edges of the roof and falls in a steady line beside the straw-covered ground. A groom tightens a girth, and the leather gives a soft, resistant creak. Nearby, a mailed guard rests his hand upon a spear whose shaft has been darkened by weather. The horses stand patiently, their coats carrying the warm, clean smell of animal and hay. From the hall comes the muffled movement of many people speaking in lowered voices. Rushes cover the floor inside, though their freshness has already been mixed with smoke, mud, and the faint odor of old wine. A servant warms wax near the hearth, preparing seals for charters and letters. The red wax becomes soft beneath the heat, ready to receive the impression of authority. Outside, Frankfurt remains wet, crowded, and watchful. The princes choose Frederick at Frankfurt on 4 March 1152, following a political compromise among the leading powers of the empire. You're close enough to imagine the solemn gathering, with electors and nobles arranged according to rank, their cloaks heavy from the journey and their expressions carefully guarded. The choice does not erase old rivalries, nor does it promise an easy reign. It creates an agreement that each faction can bear, at least for the moment. Frederick's Staufen inheritance offers continuity after Conrad III, while his family ties provide a possibility of reconciliation with men who might otherwise resist him. Henry the Lion lends his support, and the settlement gives the new ruler a foundation broader than his own duchy. Frederick becomes Roman-German king in 1152, a title he will hold until his death in 1190. The language of the election is formal and measured, yet beneath it lies the practical work of balancing families, lands, memories, and ambitions. The courtyard slowly fills with the muted colours of early spring. Dark horses lower their heads towards troughs clouded by breath, while rain beads upon bridles and polished buckles. The banners hang heavily from their poles, their embroidered devices blurred by dampness. A boy carries a bundle of firewood beneath his cloak, stepping carefully around stones hidden beneath the mud. The smell of rushes clings to the hall, where feet have pressed them flat near the benches and hearth. Smoke slips along the roof beams before escaping through an opening above. Wax seals cool upon a wooden table, their surfaces holding the marks of hands and offices that may soon be carried across distant roads. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bell sounds once, then again. The horses remain still, and the rain continues. Frederick's reign begins among ordinary textures, under a low sky, with no certainty beyond the consent gathered in the hall. The new king cannot remain at Frankfurt, because medieval royal government depends upon the ruler's presence, household and court. You travel with Frederick along roads that bend through forests, river valleys, villages, and territories belonging to men who must continually be reminded of the king's authority. Charters are issued where the court pauses, disputes are heard beneath temporary roofs, and gifts are exchanged in halls that may stand for only a single night. A king's government does not reside in one permanent capital. It moves with horses, wagons, scribes, chaplains, cooks, guards, envoys, and noble companions. The royal household carries the instruments of rule from place to place. A document can declare a privilege in quiet Latin, but that privilege becomes real only when the king's court arrives and the surrounding lords acknowledge it. Thus Frederick travels continually, transforming roads into corridors of power. His authority is visible in the company around him, in the sound of his horses, and in seals pressed into warm red wax. In the travelling hall, evening settles through layers of smoke and shadow. You sit near the edge of the firelight while servants spread fresh rushes across the floor and place wooden vessels upon long boards. Wet cloaks steam faintly beside the walls. The scent of broth, ash, leather, and damp straw mingles beneath the roof. A scribe bends over parchment, dipping his pen into dark ink while the flames move across his face. Beside him, a lump of red wax waits upon a small dish, softening in the heat. Outside, a horse shifts its weight, and the tack gives a low creak from the courtyard. Voices pass through canvas and timber, indistinct as water beneath ice. The hall is warm in one corner and cold in another. Smoke touches your eyes, then thins. The king's household rests only briefly before another road begins. Frederick's first years as ruler are shaped by memories of war, including the Second Crusade, in which he took part from 1147 to 1149 under his uncle Conrad III. You see the young duke beneath eastern skies, surrounded by armies whose size cannot conceal their uncertainty. The Crusaders carried German nobles far from Swabia, across difficult roads and unfamiliar landscapes, under a purpose expressed in the language of faith and honor. Frederick learns the discipline of a great expedition, the fragility of supplies, and the importance of keeping powerful men within a common design. He sees how commands travel slowly through a host, how horses tire, and how noble pride can become as difficult to manage as any enemy. The campaign does not give Conrad III the victory he hoped for, yet it gives Frederick experience of movement, negotiation, and military companionship. When he returns in 1149, he is no longer merely a duke shaped by inheritance. He is a man who has witnessed the distance between imperial aspiration and the weight of the ground beneath marching feet. Along the road south, the seasons change gradually beneath the travelling court. Winter mud gives way to firmer earth, then to dust rising beneath wheels and hooves. Rivers widen beneath pale sunlight, and bridges groan as wagons pass over them. In the evenings, rain taps upon wooden roofs while horses stand in the dark with their heads lowered. In warmer weather, the smell of crushed grass enters the hall through open doors. The royal household still carries smoke with it, along with wool, tallow, parchment, and iron. Every settlement offers a different arrangement of walls, wells, churches, and fields. You hear local bells from villages hidden beyond the trees, followed by the softer sounds of cooking and conversation. At night, the fire settles into red coals. The journey is long, physical, and repetitive, yet each mile brings Frederick closer to the older center of the imperial world, where kingship must be confirmed in Rome. The title of emperor reaches beyond the German kingdom and carries a universal Christian claim. You are traveling within an empire whose wider political structure includes the German lands, the Kingdom of Italy, and the Kingdom of Burgundy. The imperial title suggests a single order beneath Christian rule, extending across different peoples, customs, cities, and languages. Its meaning is grand, but its practical authority depends heavily upon personal presence. A decree may speak of ancient rights, yet a city can resist if the emperor is absent. A bishop can hesitate if protection seems distant, and a prince can strengthen his position while the royal court travels elsewhere. Frederick therefore inherits both an idea and a problem. He must make the universal claim visible through ceremonies, judgments, armies, negotiations, and repeated appearances. The empire exists in charters and crowns, but also in roads, meals, oaths, and the attention commanded by a ruler who has arrived in person. The first light over the southern roads is clear and red gold. You ride behind the king's mounted guard, watching sunlight gather along helmets, shields, and mailed shoulders. The metal links catch the dawn in small points, while leather straps remain dark beneath the moisture of the night. Frederick's beard shows the same warm color, brightened by the low light, until it seems almost copper. It is a striking feature, noticed by men who stand near him in halls, and by those who see him pass through city gates. In Italian, Barbarossa means red beard. The name belongs first to a visible detail, not to a legend. The beard is simply part of the young king's appearance, touched by sunlight as he rides. Much later, during the 13th century, Barbarossa will become a fixed part of his name. For now, you see only Frederick, his red beard, and the quiet movement of the road towards Rome. In Rome, bronze bells and Latin chant rise through the morning air. You enter a city where ancient stone stands beside churches, towers, markets, and narrow streets alive with movement. The air carries dust, river damp, incense, sweat, and the warm odor of bread from unseen ovens. Bells sound above the roofs, their bronze voices overlapping with the measured rhythm of chant. Clerics move in dark robes, while armed men keep watch near gates and courtyards. The city is not merely a setting for the imperial ceremony. It is a power with its own memories, factions, and claims. Frederick must pass through it carefully, because the coronation will join his authority to the traditions of Rome, while also placing him within the contested world of the papacy. Under the southern sun, the stones hold heat. Beneath the bells, old imperial language is being prepared for a new ruler. On 18 June 1155, Pope Adrian IV crowns Frederick Emperor in Rome. You stand within the ceremony as the crown is raised, the prayers are spoken, and the Christian empire is presented as a visible order. Frederick, who became Roman German king in 1152, now receives the imperial dignity that his title requires. The coronation confirms an ancient relationship between the German ruler and the papacy, yet it also contains the seeds of future conflict. The emperor's universal Christian claim cannot be separated from the authority of the pope who crowns him. Both offices speak of order, justice, and the protection of the church, while each understands the limits of the other differently. Frederick leaves Rome as Emperor Frederick, carrying a dignity that reaches across the German lands, Italy, and Burgundy. The ceremony is magnificent, but it does not remove the need for roads, negotiations, soldiers, and personal appearances. A crown may rest upon the head, while authority must still travel on horseback. Light enters the Roman streets in long bands between old walls. You feel the warmth of the stones beneath your feet and hear sandals, hooves, wheels, and distant voices moving through the city. A bell trembles above a church doorway, and chant fades into the ordinary murmur of the market. Dust settles upon the hems of robes. Incense remains in the air after the procession has passed, mingling with olives, leather, and sun-warmed timber. In a shaded courtyard, water falls into a basin with a quiet, repeating sound. The emperor's riders wait near the gate, their horses flicking at flies. Red gold light rests upon Frederick's mailed shoulders and touches his beard with subdued fire. Rome is bright, crowded, and ancient. The ceremony recedes behind you. Ahead, roads divide towards cities that guard their privileges, princes who measure every gesture, and a future that requires constant movement. Frederick's reign is soon shaped by the connected problems of imperial rights in Italy and conflict with the papacy. You travel north and south through a political landscape where cities possess growing wealth, strong walls, and confident memories of self-government. The Italian communes do not experience imperial rights as distant words. They encounter them through officials, taxes, courts, tolls, appointments, and demands for recognition. Frederick sees these claims as part of the order inherited by the emperor. The cities see their liberties as customs established through generations of local effort. Between them lies a difficult question concerning who may judge, appoint, command, and receive revenue. The papacy is drawn into the same struggle because papal independence and imperial authority overlap in Italian affairs. Frederick must therefore manage several kinds of legitimacy at once. His crown is German, his empire is Roman, his resources are often princely, and the wealth of Italy lies beyond easy obedience. The roads of Italy carry different sounds beneath the wheels of the court. You hear church bells from hill towns, mule bells along steep paths, and the sharp calls of merchants beneath arcades. The air smells of dust, figs, horse sweat, and stone warmed by the afternoon. In the shade of a gatehouse, guards watch the movement of envoys and pack animals. Courtiers speak in German, Latin, and the languages of the towns through which they pass. At dusk, the sky becomes pale violet above tiled roofs, while smoke rises from cooking fires in thin, straight columns. Frederick's household enters each city with the creak of harness and the measured pace of authority. A parchment may be carried into a council chamber, its words carefully arranged, and its seal bright with red wax. Outside, the city continues its own life, listening without surrendering itself entirely. Frederick also inherits a political world in which honor has the force of law and memory. You see how a public insult can become more than a private wound, because medieval rulers and nobles understand reputation as part of political substance. A gesture made before witnesses, a refusal to appear, a disputed place at a ceremony, or an accusation spoken in a crowded hall may alter the balance between houses. Honor shapes the language of letters and the arrangement of processions. Perceived humiliation can demand a response, even when a quiet settlement would be materially wiser. Frederick must protect his dignity while preserving alliances that his government requires. The emperor cannot appear weak before princes, cities, bishops, or rival courts. At the same time, every display of force may create new resentment. Public honor and practical necessity pull against each other, and the king's judgment is tested in the space between them. Evening gathers around the traveling court with a softer color. You rest beneath a roof where the rafters are blackened by years of smoke, and the last light lies across the rushes in narrow strips. A servant folds a cloak near the hearth. Someone pours water into a basin. Leather dries slowly beside the wall. From the stable comes the familiar shift of a horse, followed by the faint creak of tack. Outside, wind moves through the trees and brushes the shutters with a gentle sound. The day's letters have been sealed, the horses fed, and the guards changed. For a little while, no messenger enters. The fire settles. A candle leans in its pool of wax. The royal household remains ready to move, though the hall is quiet enough to hear the small sounds of breathing, cloth, and wood. In 1156, Frederick marries Beatrice of Burgundy, joining his kingship to another important region of the empire. You see Beatrice entering the Stauffen political orbit with her own inheritance, dignity, and network of relationships. Her marriage to Frederick is not merely a private union. It connects the royal household with the Kingdom of Burgundy and strengthens the emperor's position within the wider structure of his lands. Beatrice brings Burgundy into the political orbit of the Stauffen court, giving Frederick another source of legitimacy and another territory whose interests must be represented. The marriage also enlarges the presence of the imperial family, placing Beatrice beside the king in ceremonies, journeys, negotiations, and acts of patronage. Together, Frederick and Beatrice become the center of a court that moves continually through the empire. The household carries documents, treasures, clothing, liturgical objects, and memories from one residence to another. The union gives the reign a deeper political shape. In the halls of Burgundy, the air is cooler, and the stone holds the scent of rain. You move beneath arches where footsteps return softly from the walls. Tapestries stir when doors open, revealing fields silvered by morning and distant hills fading into mist. Beeswax candles burn with small, steady flames. The smell of rushes is clean here, mixed with wool, cold iron, and the faint sweetness of stored fruit. Beatrice's attendants arrange fabrics and vessels brought from different lands, while scribes prepare letters for nobles who may never meet the emperor in person. At the windows, pale light touches carved stone and the edges of painted wooden panels. Outside, a bell marks the hour across the valley. Burgundy enters the quiet rhythm of the Stauffen court. Roads carry its messages east and south, while Frederick's household continues to gather distant places beneath one moving roof. The royal family becomes part of Frederick's strategy for securing the future of the empire. You see their son Henry, still a child, placed before the princes and elected king of the Romans in 1169. The election gives the dynasty a visible succession, while Frederick remains alive, active, and continually present across his territories. Henry is too young to carry the full weight of government, yet his title signals continuity. The princes are reminded that the Stauffen order is intended to last beyond one reign. Frederick's authority has been built through compromise, travel, ceremony, and personal strength. His son's election seeks to preserve that achievement through inheritance and recognition. The child king belongs to a future that is not yet formed, while Frederick continues to confront the immediate difficulties of Italy, the papacy, and the rival interests of the empire. In the background, Beatrice and the household maintain the connections upon which dynastic power depends. A quieter night lies over the court after the day's formal business. You hear a single page turn near the fire, followed by the scratch of a pen against parchment. The flames illuminate metal clasps, wooden bowls, and the smooth surface of a seal. Smoke gathers beneath the rafters and moves slowly towards the opening above. A draft passes beneath the door, carrying the scent of damp earth from the courtyard. The horses outside are mostly still. One stamps lightly, then settles again. Beyond the walls, a stream moves over stones, and the sound remains constant beneath the silence. Beatrice's rooms are quiet. Henry sleeps under the care of attendants. The emperor's banners hang without movement. For a short hour, Burgundy, Italy, Swabia, and the distant German lands seem joined by nothing more than candlelight and rest. Frederick's long reign lasts from his election in 1152 until his death on 10 June 1190. More than 3 decades of movement and decision. You travel through these years with him, from Frankfurt to Rome, from Swabia to Burgundy, and across roads connecting castles, monasteries, cities, and princely courts. The king's presence remains essential because authority cannot be left unattended for long. A charter must be witnessed, a dispute must be judged, an oath must be received, a city must be summoned, a prince reassured, or a bishop protected. The emperor's practical power rises and falls with the distance between his household and those who claim his attention. Frederick therefore continues to ride, listen, command, negotiate, punish, reward, and appear. The universal dignity of the imperial title rests upon the repeated physical labor of a man traveling through rain, dust, heat, and snow. His reign becomes a pattern of roads. The familiar textures of those roads return with every season. Winter brings mud around Frankfurt, packed into wheel tracks and splashed along the horses' legs. Spring carries the smell of wet grass and new leaves. Summer brightens the metal of mailed riders until it seems almost white. Autumn darkens the fields and fills the halls with the scent of smoke. Leather straps soften in rain, then stiffen near the fire. Wax seals cool beneath the hands of scribes. Rushes crackle under boots. Somewhere nearby, a bell marks prayer, supper, or midnight. The court moves onward, and each place receives it for a little while. No single castle contains the whole empire. No solitary document can replace the ruler's arrival. The king is present in the sound of hooves, the red wax, and the patient work of appearing again. By the later years of his life, the name Barbarossa has begun to gather more weight than the beard that first inspired it. You see Frederick beside Beatrice, within a court shaped by the Stauffen dynasty and enlarged through Burgundy. You see Henry, once a child elected king of the Romans in 1169, growing towards the responsibilities prepared for him. You see the emperor still measured against Italy, the papacy, the princes, and the ancient promise of Roman rule. Yet the name Red Beard is not originally a title of ceremony. It is a simple description carried through languages and memories. The fixed use of Barbarossa belongs to the 13th century, after Frederick's lifetime, when later generations turn a visible feature into a legendary name. In his own age, the Red Beard is part of the man who rides, judges, negotiates, and sleeps beneath traveling roofs. The legend begins in ordinary light. At dawn, the young king looks towards Italy from a road above the plain. You stand beside him while the fields receive the first pale color of morning. Far away, towers rise through mist, and beyond them lie wealthy cities with their walls, councils, markets, and guarded freedoms. The empire's old claims weight there, as do the connected disputes of imperial rights and papal power. Frederick's beard catches a narrow line of red-gold light. His horse breathes into the cool air. The road descends gently. Behind you, the household is waking. Ahead, Italy lies quiet beneath the sky. The bronze bells have not yet begun. A strap moves softly against leather. The king turns his horse, and the court follows. The sound of hooves grows faint. The fields remain still. The morning widens. You are crossing the Alps in 1154, where the road narrows between dark rock and slopes of melting snow. Thin alpine air enters your lungs, clean and sharp beneath the leather hood of your cloak. Mules step carefully over stones loosened by winter, while the imperial household moves in a long, patient file below the high passes. Frederick travels south, intending to restore imperial rights in Italy, though the meaning of those rights remains uncertain in every valley and city. Behind you lies the German kingdom, with its forests, bishoprics, and castles. Ahead waits a richer and more urban political world, where tolls are collected at bridges, judges sit beneath painted arches, and communes guard ancient privileges with quiet determination. The first Italian campaign has begun. The snow beside the road is grey at its edges, carrying pine needles, fragments of bark, and the small dark marks of mountain animals. Water slips from the slopes in narrow silver threads, gathering beneath wooden bridges before hurrying towards the lower valleys. The horse's breath hangs briefly in the cold, although the air becomes softer whenever the road bends towards the sun. Bells tied to pack animals sound at uneven intervals, each note fading into the wide silence between the ridges. Your gloves are damp from the rains, and the wool at your shoulders holds the faint scent of smoke from the previous evening's fire. Far below, the first Lombard roads appear as pale lines across green ground. Their dust will rise beneath marching feet, and the names of Pavia, Milan, Tortona, and Rome will soon become familiar to every rider in the procession. You descend towards Tortona, a fortified town lying among vineyards, fields, and roads that connect the coast with the interior plain. The walls are not merely barriers of stone, for they mark the point at which local authority meets the claims of a distant king. Frederick orders the siege, and engines are brought forward while men examine the ground for weaknesses. Tortona resists through the winter, holding its gates closed against the imperial army. In February 1155, the town surrenders, exhausted by hunger, pressure, and the uncertainty of relief. Soon afterwards, Tortona is destroyed. Charred timber remains where houses stood, and broken roof tiles lie among the blackened beams. The settlement becomes an early sign that Frederick's journey will involve more than ceremonial recognition. A faint warmth rests over the ruined streets when you pass between the remains of the houses. The stones retain the smell of smoke, and rain has turned the ash into a dark paste beneath your boots. Splintered doors lean against walls that have lost their roofs, while fragments of pottery shine faintly beside a dry well. Beyond the town, vines continue to cling to their wooden supports, their leaves trembling in the mild spring wind. A dog moves cautiously through a courtyard and disappears behind a fallen lintel. Men speak in lowered voices as carts remove timber that can still be used. The road is busy with imperial servants, muleteers, and messengers, yet Tortona itself feels emptied of sound. Even the birds seem to keep their distance from the blackened places. From Tortona, the procession turns towards Pavia, where Frederick encounters a city accustomed to royal ceremony and commercial movement. Market bells sound above the streets, marking the hours while merchants unload cloth, salt, wine, and metal goods beneath covered arcades. Pavia's river traffic brings another rhythm, with oars touching water and ropes creaking against moorings. Frederick is crowned King of Italy in 1155, probably at Pavia, although the precise details of the ceremony remain uncertain. The uncertainty does not lessen the importance of the title. A crown rests upon his head, and the old language of kingship is spoken before witnesses who understand that ceremony can carry legal weight. Pavia receives him with outward honor, though the deeper questions of authority remain unsettled. Market bells drift through the warm air as you stand beside a square crowded with awnings. The cloth above you moves gently, filtering the sunlight into pale red, yellow, and brown. Pavia smells of river mud, crushed herbs, horse sweat, and bread cooling on wooden boards. A spice seller lifts a small jar, and the scent of cinnamon passes briefly through the heavier odors of the street. Water runs along a shallow channel beside the paving stones, carrying scraps of straw towards the river. Goldsmiths work behind open shutters, their small hammers making bright, careful sounds. At the edge of the square, a priest crosses beneath a bell tower, while two armed men watch the movement of the crowd. Pavia is prosperous, alert, and old enough to know that a royal crown may promise order without guaranteeing it. Milan submits during the first campaign, acknowledging Frederick's presence while preserving as much of its own position as circumstances allow. The submission settles an immediate danger, but it does not end the deeper dispute over imperial rights. Milan is too wealthy and too confident to regard obedience as permanent, and Frederick is too conscious of inherited claims to accept local government as entirely independent. The city's walls, markets, churches, and public offices embody a civic power that has grown over generations. Imperial authority, meanwhile, speaks in the language of kings, emperors, and ancient law. Between those forms of power lies the central tension of Frederick's Italian policy. He seeks recognition, revenue, jurisdiction, and dignity, while Milan seeks to protect customs that its citizens regard as lawful. You enter Milan through streets where the sounds change with every turning. Workshops ring with the tapping of metal, carts grind over uneven stones, and narrow alleys carry the calls of sellers beneath high walls. The city feels denser than Pavia, with more traffic pressing between its buildings and more voices rising from behind shutters. Wool hangs from beams to dry, dyed in deep reds and muted blues, while leather workers scrape hides beside pools of cloudy water. Church towers rise above the roofs, their bells passing over the city like slow waves. In the courtyards, cool shade gathers beneath fig trees and wooden galleries. The air tastes of dust, smoke, and ripe fruit. Milan has submitted, yet every surface suggests strength held in reserve. Frederick leaves Milan and continues towards Rome, where imperial and papal authority meet amid the ruins and ceremonies of the ancient city. In June 1155, he enters Rome and is crowned emperor by Adrian IV. The crown confirms a partnership already troubled by fear and necessity. The Pope requires protection and recognition, while the emperor requires sacred legitimacy for the power he claims. Within the city, the Roman commune associated with Arnold of Brescia resists both papal and imperial authority. Its supporters imagine a civic order less dependent upon the claims of church and empire, and their resistance makes Rome uncertain ground. Frederick's coronation, therefore, takes place within a city where several understandings of government stand close together, each supported by memory, law, and armed men. Summer light lies pale upon the Roman stones, and heat gathers in the hollows between broken walls. Dust clings to your sandals as you cross ground where temples, houses, and monuments stand beside one another in varying states of ruin. Cicadas rasp from trees near the river, while distant church bells descend slowly through the heavy air. Water flows from a public fountain into a worn basin, and the surface trembles whenever a passerby touches its rim. Marble fragments have been built into later walls, their carved letters turned sideways or hidden beneath plaster. The smell of dust is mixed with oil, sweat, and the dry sweetness of crushed grass. Rome feels immense even where it is damaged, and the imperial crown seems to rest beneath the weight of many older crowns. The first Italian expedition ends without resolving the conflict that drew Frederick across the mountains. Tortona has been destroyed, Milan has submitted, Pavia has witnessed a royal coronation, and Rome has received an emperor. Yet each success carries its own qualification. A city may kneel without surrendering its memory, and a ceremony may declare authority without supplying the officials needed to enforce it. Frederick returns north with knowledge of Italy's wealth and complexity. The roads, courts, markets, and communes have shown him that imperial claims must be translated into daily government. Italy is not simply a land from which a king may collect money. It is a landscape of cities that already govern, judge, tax, trade, and negotiate. Across the plain, the season turns slowly from spring into summer. The Po carries broad bands of dull light beneath its banks, and reeds whisper whenever the wind moves through them. Dust rises from Lombard roads in soft brown clouds, settling upon cloaks, bridles, and the leaves of roadside trees. Farm workers bend among the fields, their figures small against stretches of wheat and barley. At evening, frogs call from irrigation channels, and smoke lifts from villages where supper is being prepared. The mountains remain visible far behind you, blue and indistinct beneath the horizon. The road northward feels less like an escape than a temporary withdrawal. Pavia, Milan, Tortona, and Rome remain in the mind as places where ceremonies ended, but arguments continued. In 1158, Frederick returns to Italy and holds the Diet of Roncaglia near Piacenza. The gathering takes place beside the roads and waterways of the plain, where bishops, nobles, jurists, imperial officers, and representatives of Italian cities assemble beneath guarded banners. Roncaglia becomes a moment when legal language attempts to turn inherited claims into enforceable government. The decrees declare that judicial and administrative authority in the Kingdom of Italy derives from the empire. Imperial officials are appointed to exercise powers that many northern Italian cities have long exercised themselves. The documents give shape to an imperial program, placing rights into formulae that can be copied, proclaimed, and carried from one court to another. Parchment becomes an instrument of government. You are near the assembled officials when the parchment is unrolled upon a wooden table. Its surface is covered in legal formulae written in dark ink by a careful hand. The edges curl slightly in the heat, and a stone is placed upon one corner to keep the sheet flat. Sand has been scattered across fresh writing, absorbing the moisture before the words are read aloud. Wax softens beside a small brazier, releasing the resinous smell of pine and honey. Around you, horses stamp at flies, clerks whisper over names, and the fabric of distant tents lifts and falls in the afternoon breeze. The language sounds measured, almost calm, although each phrase reaches towards toll gates, courts, roads, markets, and offices already claimed by the cities. The cities resist the renewed collection of imperial regalia, taxes, tolls, and judicial rights. Their resistance does not arise only from pride or refusal to obey a foreign ruler. Many communes regard their customs as lawful because those customs have been exercised, witnessed, and defended over generations. The decrees of Roncaglia therefore touch the practical foundations of civic life. A toll at a bridge may support a city wall, a court may belong to a communal office, and a market right may be understood as part of the city's inherited identity. Frederick sees these powers as imperial rights that have been neglected. The communes see them as liberties confirmed by long use. Each side possesses a language of legitimacy. Heat settles over the Po plain until the distant fields appear to waver. Flies gather around the mouths of water jars, and the leather of harness grows warm beneath your fingers. Along the road, carts move slowly through pale dust, their wheels leaving dark grooves where the ground remains damp. In the shade of poplars, men sleep with hats drawn across their faces, while insects hum above the grass. A church bell sounds from far away, followed by another bell from a settlement hidden beyond the fields. The notes do not form a melody, yet they give the afternoon a loose and patient rhythm. Beneath that softness, messengers carry orders between cities, and every mile of road becomes part of the argument. Frederick besieges Milan again in 1158 and forces its submission. The settlement is harsher than the first, because the claims made at Roncaglia have given the conflict a more definite legal structure. Milan yields under pressure, yet the submission does not make the city peaceful. Its citizens continue to remember the reach of their communal government, and the imperial administration continues to press into offices, revenues, and judgments. The cycle begins to take a recognizable form. Frederick arrives with an army, a city resists, a siege produces submission, and an agreement creates the conditions for another rebellion. Settlement becomes an interval rather than a conclusion. Each departure leaves behind officials, grievances, and memories of force. Around Milan, summer fields glow beneath a sky whitened by heat. The road is hard at noon and soft near the irrigation channels, where hoofprints fill with brown water. Grain dust floats from loaded carts, mixing with the sharper smell of cut hay. At dusk, Swallows pass low over the ditches, turning suddenly above the reeds. The city walls hold the last light, while smoke from cook fires rises in narrow columns beyond the gates. Somewhere within the streets, a hammer strikes iron at regular intervals, and the sound reaches the fields with surprising clarity. You can feel how a city remains present even when its gates are closed. Stone, smoke, bells, and voices gather into a single stubborn presence. The papacy watches the northern dispute with growing unease. Stronger imperial government in northern Italy could threaten papal independence, particularly if Frederick gains control of courts, roads, revenues, and fortified cities near the papal territories. The Norman Kingdom of Sicily forms another major power, shaping Frederick's Italian policy. Its rulers hold lands, armies, ports, and political connections that cannot be ignored by an emperor moving through the peninsula. Italy is therefore not one conflict, but several overlapping fields of power. Imperial rights, papal security, communal liberty, and Norman strength meet around the same roads. Every expedition must account for the distance between the Alps and Rome, as well as the alliances that may form along the way. Night arrives gently over the camp, leaving a red line above the western fields. Distant church bells sound beneath the movement of an army, their notes softened by warm air and miles of grassland. Fires burn low beside wagons, and the scent of onions, oats, and singed wool passes between the tents. A groom brushes dust from a horse's flank, raising a faint cloud that glows in the firelight. Metal buckles click as equipment is loosened for the night, while sentries stand where the road disappears into darkness. Beyond the camp, the Po plain lies broad and unseen. The stars emerge slowly, and the quiet conversations of clerks and soldiers become indistinct beneath the steady breathing of animals. Milan rebels once more after the renewed settlement, and the imperial army returns for a long siege. In 1162, the city surrenders. This time Milan is destroyed, although its inhabitants are not simply erased from the landscape. They leave their houses, churches, workshops, and civic buildings, carrying household goods, tools, religious objects, and memories into the surrounding settlements. The city's material form is broken, but its people remain part of Lombardy's living world. Frederick's victory demonstrates the force of an emperor able to gather an army and sustain a siege. It also creates a deeper wound, because destruction cannot easily transform a proud commune into a willing instrument of imperial rule. After the capitulation, charred timber lies across courtyards where merchants once stored cloth and grain. Roof tiles have fallen into heaps, and weeds already press between the stones. A cracked bell rests beside a church wall, its bronze surface dulled by smoke. The smell of wet ash rises whenever a boot disturbs the blackened ground. Families move along the roads with bundles tied in blankets, while ox carts carry doors, chests, and pieces of furniture towards new shelters. The plain remains green beyond the ruined streets, and birds continue to settle upon the surviving walls. Destruction changes the sound of Milan before it changes the memory of Milan. The city is damaged, but it has not vanished. Frederick's Italian policy is not only a search for wealth. Revenue matters, and imperial regalia, taxes, tolls, and judicial rights can strengthen the monarchy. Yet the larger purpose is constitutional. Frederick attempts to redefine the basis of imperial rule by insisting that authority in the Kingdom of Italy belongs to the empire, even where communes have administered that authority for generations. Roncaglia provides the language, officials provide the machinery, and military power provides the pressure. The arrangement is coherent from the imperial perspective. It is also deeply disruptive, because it transforms customary relationships into subordinate offices. A city that once governed through its own institutions now faces a judge, collector, or administrator appointed from above. Morning returns with a thin veil of mist over the fields. Dew gathers along the edges of broad leaves, and the first carts make dark lines through the pale road. Bakers open shutters, releasing warmth that smells of flour and wood ash. In a village square, a woman pours water into a basin while a child watches the surface tremble. The bells begin one by one, marking prayer, work, and the opening of stalls. Nothing in these ordinary movements announces the constitutional dispute, yet the dispute is present in every bridge, court, market, and tax chest. Government is felt through small encounters. A seal pressed into wax, a toll demanded at a gate, or a judgment delivered by an unfamiliar official can alter the meaning of an entire city. The fourth Italian expedition begins in 1166, carrying Frederick once again across the mountains and along the roads of the peninsula. The journey is more difficult than earlier campaigns because resistance has gained experience and alliances have become more deliberate. The imperial army advances towards Rome, while the papacy and the Norman kingdom of Sicily remain powerful forces near the southern horizon. In 1167, Frederick captures Rome, achieving a success that appears to restore the path opened by his coronation in June 1155. Yet disease soon spreads through the imperial forces. Illness weakens men who have survived marches, heat, hunger, and siege work, and Frederick must withdraw. The fourth expedition ends disastrously, not through a single battle, but through the slow collapse of military strength. The Roman summer presses upon the camp with a weight that seems to remain even after sunset. Canvas smells of dust and sweat, while water jars grow warm beneath the hands of thirsty soldiers. Flies rise from discarded food, and the sick lie beneath shaded awnings where attendants move quietly between them. Church bells continue to sound from the city, their solemn notes crossing fields marked by carts and burial trenches. At night, the air carries the bitter scent of medicinal herbs crushed in wooden bowls. A horse coughs beside a wagon, and somewhere beyond the camp, a dog answers with a low, uncertain bark. The captured city stands nearby, but the army's strength is draining away. The withdrawal from Rome changes the balance of the Italian struggle. Frederick has reached the city and held it briefly, yet the expedition shows how fragile imperial power can become when distance, disease, and local resistance work together. A campaign may seem victorious at one moment and untenable at the next. The emperor's authority depends upon movement, supply, obedience, and the presence of men who can enforce his commands. When those supports weaken, legal claims remain on parchment, while roads, gates, and councils return to local control. The failure of 1167 encourages the northern communes to cooperate more closely. Their resistance is no longer scattered among separate cities. It begins to acquire the shape of a league. Rain falls during the next season in long, quiet sheets, darkening the roads and filling the wheel ruts. Water beads upon tent ropes, runs from the edges of cloaks, and gathers beneath wagons in shallow pools. The scent of wet earth rises from the plain, mixed with crushed grass and the sour odor of soaked leather. A messenger rides past with mud across his boots, his horse's mane plastered against its neck. In the distance, bells sound beneath a low sky, their notes softened until they seem to come from the ground itself. The empire's banners hang heavily in the damp air. Across Lombardy, other banners are being prepared. The Lombard League forms in 1167 as a coalition of northern Italian communes opposed to Frederick's policies. Its members defend their cities, their institutions, and the customary rights they believe imperial government has threatened. The League is not a single city and not a simple rebellion. It is an alliance whose strength lies in cooperation among communities that have often competed with one another. Roads can be watched, supplies can be shared, and armies can gather beneath a common purpose. Frederick faces a political structure that answers the imperial project with another form of organization. The communes do not reject every idea of order. They seek an order in which civic authority remains lawful and visible within the city. You pass through a Lombard town where new timber is being raised beside an old wall. Carpenters work under a pale morning sky, their adzes biting into beams with soft, regular thuds. Flour dust covers the hands of women carrying baskets from a mill, and damp wool hangs from lines stretched between narrow houses. A bell rings above the gate, followed by the creak of a drawbridge lifting for a wagon. On a table beneath an arcade, clerks compare lists of names, quantities of grain, and distances between communes. The parchment is marked with folds from repeated handling. Here resistance has become administration, and alliance is measured in carts, watchmen, repairs, and provisions. Frederick's fifth expedition continues the long pattern of arrival, siege, settlement, rebellion, and departure. The emperor remains capable of gathering forces, negotiating with princes, and imposing terms upon individual cities. The communes, however, have learned from every previous campaign. They understand the speed of imperial movement, the importance of fortified roads, and the cost of allowing one city to stand alone. Frederick's claim to restore a unified imperial government encounters a region already connected through trade, law, kinship, and shared danger. Each campaign deepens the knowledge on both sides. The emperor refines his instruments of rule, while the cities refine their methods of resistance. Autumn light lies low across the plain, touching the stubble of harvested fields with silver. Leaves gather in the gutters of village streets, and the smell of apples comes from storerooms where fruit rests beneath straw. The roads are firmer now, though mud remains beneath the hedges and along the banks of narrow streams. Crows move between ploughed fields, lifting together whenever riders approach. In the evenings, shutters close early, and warm light appears through small openings in wooden doors. A distant bell marks the hour after sunset, while nearer sounds fade into the thickening dark. The season offers no dramatic sign, only shorter days and the steady preparation of communities that no another army may arrive. The sixth expedition eventually brings Frederick towards the decisive encounter at Legnano in 1176. By then, the imperial project has accumulated victories, defeats, charters, punishments, and unresolved claims. Tortona has been destroyed, and Milan has been forced to submit before its destruction. Rome has been captured and abandoned, while Roncaglia has turned theory into administrative demand. The Lombard League now stands as a disciplined alliance of cities, able to gather men and defend the roads that connect them. Frederick's purpose remains larger than the collection of money. He seeks a durable constitutional settlement in which imperial authority governs the Kingdom of Italy. At Legnano, that purpose meets an organized civic resistance. The approach to Legnano passes through fields bright with early light and damp beneath the hooves. Grass bends under a cool breeze, and the plain carries the scents of mud, leather, trampled herbs, and wood smoke. Armor makes a muted shifting sound whenever riders turn in their saddles. Spears rise above the ranks like a thin forest, while banners move slowly against the sky. From far away, church bells sound beneath the marching army, their notes crossing the fields without revealing which side they favor. Your hands are cold around the reins, though the sun is already warming the metal at your wrist. The air feels clear, and every small sound travels further than expected. At Legnano in 1176, Frederick is defeated by the Lombard League. The battle does not erase imperial power, and it does not make the communes entirely independent of larger political forces. Its importance lies in the failure of a military answer to a constitutional dispute. Frederick can cross the Alps, besiege cities, issue decrees, and appoint officials, yet he cannot easily make northern Italy forget the authority that its communes have exercised. The alliance at Legnano demonstrates that local government, when defended collectively, can withstand the pressure of an emperor. The sixth expedition therefore closes the cycle without producing the complete restoration Frederick had sought. The empire remains present, but its presence must now be negotiated. After the fighting, the field grows quiet beneath a sky turning towards evening. Broken shafts lie among flattened grasses, and torn cloth catches upon thorn bushes near the road. Water gathers in shallow depressions where horses have churned the soil, reflecting strips of rose-colored light. Attendants move between the wounded, speaking softly as they carry jars and folded cloth. A bell sounds from a church beyond the fields, followed by another farther away. Smoke rises from cooking fires where soldiers prepare the evening meal, and the scent of boiled grain drifts across the damp ground. Nothing in the landscape explains the arguments that brought the armies here. The earth receives hoofprints, blood, rain, and ash with the same patient silence. The 6 major expeditions into Italy carried Frederick through a changing political world. His first campaign began in 1154, when the Alps opened towards Tortona, Pavia, Milan, and Rome. In 1155, he became King of Italy and was crowned emperor by Adrian IV in June. In 1158, Roncaglia gave legal form to claims that had previously remained broad and uncertain. Milan surrendered in 1162 after a long siege and was destroyed, yet its people continued to inhabit the wider Lombard landscape. The 4th expedition began in 1166 and ended in disaster after disease weakened the army. Rome was captured in 1167, and the Lombard League formed in that same year. The 6th expedition ended at Legnano in 1176. The evening air cools the stones beside the road, while the last warmth of the day remains in sheltered hollows. Thin smoke passes between the trees and dissolves above the fields. Leather reins feel smooth where many hands have polished them, and the wool of your cloak has gathered the smell of horses, rain, and distant fires. Beyond the darkening plain, the Alps are hidden, though you remember their narrow paths and melting snow. Pavia's market bells, Milan's crowded streets, Tortona's charred timber, and Rome's ancient stones remain joined in memory. The names return quietly: Frederick, Italy, Roncaglia, Milan, Rome, Legnano. Their history is not a straight road, but a series of crossings, each one leaving another mark upon the land. Night settles over the Lombard plain, and the roads become pale beneath the stars. Somewhere near the camp, a sentry shifts his weight, and a horse moves against its tether. Church bells continue at distant intervals, marking hours that pass without urgency. The imperial banners hang still, their colors lost in darkness, while the towns of the League close their gates and keep their own watch. The dispute over authority has not disappeared at Legnano. It has changed its language, its alliances, and the limits within which imperial power can operate. Frederick remains emperor, and Italy remains within the imagination of the empire. Yet northern Italy has shown that inherited claims require consent, negotiation, and endurance. You stand beside the quiet road as the last riders disappear beyond the fields. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of wet grass and extinguished fires. A thin line of moonlight rests upon a distant wall, while the darker shapes of trees gather around the villages. The mountains wait beyond the horizon, silent and immense, holding the memory of every crossing. Behind you, the plain contains ruined cities, renewed communes, legal formulae, and the footprints of armies. Ahead, the road continues towards other disputes and other seasons. The bells fade gradually beneath the night. Frederick's 6 expeditions have ended, but the question they carried from the Alps remains suspended over Italy, patient as the darkness. In the year 1167, an unusual sight appeared across the northern Italian plain, where rival cities began setting aside their quarrels to face a distant emperor together. Milan, Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, Brescia and Bologna had often competed over roads, markets, rivers and influence, yet the claims of Frederick Barbarossa pressed upon them with a weight that ordinary rivalry could not withstand. His imperial program reached into the government of every commune, asserting the right to appoint officials and judge disputes that the cities believed belonged within their own walls. The Lombard League emerged in 1167 as a coalition of northern Italian communes resisting Frederick's authority, and its strength came precisely from the uneasy union of places that seldom trusted one another completely. Across the plain, autumn moisture gathered in the ruts of the roads, and carts passed slowly between fields softened by recent rain. Wet stone beneath unfinished walls reflected the pale sky, while horses' hooves pressed dark marks into the mud. In the courtyards of Cremona and Mantua, provisions were stacked beneath wooden awnings, protected from the drizzle by coarse cloth. Milanese messengers arrived in travel-stained cloaks, and men from Bergamo listened beside them, their hands resting near sword hilts. Bells rang behind city walls whenever a gate opened, carrying a muffled note across the damp air. The sound did not proclaim peace, because peace had not been found, but it marked the patient assembling of a common purpose. The League did not arise from affection among the communes, nor from any sudden discovery that their political interests were identical. Its members remained jealous of their privileges, suspicious of neighboring councils, and attentive to every alteration in the balance of power. Milan remembered destruction and rebuilding. Cremona guarded its river connections. Mantua watched the approaches through marshy country, and Bologna defended its position among the roads of Emilia. Bergamo and Brescia carried their own memories of rivalry, while smaller communities measured every promise against the danger of imperial punishment. Even so, Frederick's claim to appoint officials and judge disputes threatened the autonomy of all of them. Against that broad claim, separate resistance seemed fragile, and the cities joined their strength beneath the name of the Lombard League. A low wind moved along the embankments, stirring reeds beside the canals and lifting the smell of wet earth from the fields. In the shade of arcades, scribes bent over parchment while rain tapped gently upon the tiles above them. Wax softened near small lamps, and seals waited on cords beside folded letters. The roads between the Lombard towns were dusty in dry weather and heavy with mud when the clouds broke, but they remained busy with riders carrying news. Wagon wheels creaked beneath sacks of grain, barrels of wine, bundles of arrows, and lengths of timber. At the edge of a settlement, you could hear a smith striking iron, then the softer rasp of a file, while beyond the houses, the bells behind city walls answered one another across the plain. The League also received support from Pope Alexander III, whose conflict with Frederick gave the communes a powerful spiritual and political ally. Alexander opposed the emperor's attempt to establish a more obedient order in Italy, and his name lent the coalition an authority that reached beyond the councils of individual cities. In this setting, alliance became more than a military arrangement. It was a declaration that local liberties could stand beside papal opposition, and that the emperor's legal language would not be accepted without resistance. Milan, Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, Brescia, and Bologna appeared at different stages within the coalition, joined by other communes whose participation shifted with circumstance. The Lombard League was therefore a living arrangement, changing as danger approached, and as each city calculated the cost of endurance. Near the fields, evening moisture settled on the grass, and the narrow tracks between villages grew quiet beneath a silvering sky. You're walking beside a column of wagons, their wooden axles groaning whenever a wheel sinks into a hollow. Leather harness darkens with rain, and the horses breathe clouds into the cool air. Crossbow strings hang beneath sheltering eaves, drying in the sun after a morning of dampness. The men guarding the provisions speak in low voices, naming Milan, Alessandria, and the roads towards Pavia. There is no single campfire large enough to contain the whole alliance, only scattered flames behind walls and farmhouses. Their small lights resemble separate thoughts gradually settling into one difficult decision. One of the League's most eloquent answers to imperial authority was the foundation, or perhaps the consolidation, of Alessandria. The city was named in honor of Alexander III, and its existence carried a meaning that could be read by anyone who understood the politics of the plain. Alessandria was both a political statement and a fortified answer to imperial power, a settlement raised where roads and interests met, declaring that the communes could build their own future. Its walls did not merely protect inhabitants from soldiers. They gave physical form to an alliance that might otherwise have remained a collection of promises. Within Alessandria, the League's support for Pope Alexander III became visible in stone, timber, gates, towers, and the daily labor required to keep a threatened city alive. Around the new settlement, the ground held pale marks from carts and deep channels left by wagons bearing earth. Fresh masonry smelled of lime, and the rough faces of stones scratched the palms of laborers as they lifted them into place. Timber beams rested beside half-finished towers, their surfaces warm beneath the afternoon light. Water gathered in shallow hollows near the foundations, reflecting scaffolds and moving figures. From within the enclosure came the rhythm of hammers, the scrape of shovels, and the occasional ringing of bells behind city walls. Beyond the ramparts, the plain opened towards distant roads and low wooded ridges. Alessandria stood there with the quiet firmness of an argument requiring no spoken explanation. Frederick's response was shaped by the scale of his imperial claim. He did not regard the communes as independent powers, entitled to determine their own officials and disputes without reference to the empire. To Frederick, royal expeditions could restore the rights of the crown, collect what belonged to imperial authority, and impose order upon a region whose local governments had grown accustomed to acting freely. Yet his position contained a difficulty that would become more evident with time. The empire possessed broad legal claims, but it depended upon intermittent royal expeditions to make those claims effective. Each campaign required men, money, food, roads, allies, and a season suitable for movement. In the intervals between expeditions, the communes could repair walls, renew agreements, and deepen their resistance. The roads east of Milan lay pale beneath the heat of summer, though shaded hollows retained the scent of rain from earlier days. Dust rose around passing riders and settled upon their sleeves, bridles, and the leaves of roadside trees. At wells, animals crowded close to the stone rims, while carriers waited for water to fill leather bags. The creak of wagon wheels carrying provisions traveled far across open fields, especially during the stillness of late afternoon. Under canvas, clerks counted sacks and jars, while soldiers examined spearheads and dried bowstrings. A faint breeze moved through the grasses, carrying the smell of crushed herbs and warm leather towards the distant walls of the towns. In 1167, Frederick's imperial army captured Rome, and for a moment the emperor seemed to have achieved the kind of decisive success that could make resistance appear foolish. Rome held immense symbolic importance, and its occupation placed Frederick close to the center of papal opposition. Yet the victory could not be secured by force alone. Disease entered the imperial camp, spreading through crowded quarters where men, animals, waste, and stagnant water stood too near one another. Mosquitoes moved among the tents, and fever took hold during the heat. Many people died, including important nobles and officials whose experience and authority were difficult to replace. The army that had entered Rome in strength found itself weakened by an enemy no shield could turn aside. Night settled over the camp with a thickness that made the torches appear small and remote. Mosquitoes hovered above dark pools, and the air carried the sour smell of sickness, damp canvas, and unwashed wool. A man coughed behind one tent, while another called softly for water and received no answer. Horses shifted in their ropes, disturbed by insects, and wagon wheels stood motionless beneath a skin of dust. Somewhere beyond the camp, a bell sounded from a church, its note passing through the feverish darkness without urgency. The Roman summer pressed down upon the ground, and the imperial banners hung limp above men who had crossed the Alps believing that cities could be compelled more easily than the body could be defended. Frederick was forced to retreat, and the withdrawal from Rome changed the balance in northern Italy. It did not erase the emperor's victories, nor did it make the empire powerless, but it allowed the Lombard League to consolidate its position. The cities had time to renew their agreements, strengthen their walls, and organize the practical systems upon which resistance depended. Alessandria became more than a name associated with the Pope. It became a place where the League's political imagination was translated into fortifications, stores, garrisons, and civic discipline. The imperial camp had been defeated by epidemic, while the communes gained strength from the space Frederick's retreat created. Disease had accomplished what armies could not, and the lesson remained quietly present in every later calculation. Morning mist clung to the low ground beyond the Roman roads, turning tents and wagons into blurred shapes. The first light revealed abandoned fires, trampled grass, and darkened patches where rain had collected beside the camp. Servants carried water between the shelters, stepping carefully around sleeping men and bodies prepared for burial. The scent of smoke lingered beneath the sharper odor of fever. Insects gathered near the marshy edges, and distant birds began calling from trees not yet touched by sunlight. The army moved reluctantly, its columns stretched along the road, while behind it Rome remained among its churches and ruins. The retreat made a long, uneven sound of harness, wheels, hooves, and muted orders. The Lombard League built and maintained fortified settlements against imperial intervention, understanding that survival could not rest solely upon one battle or speech. Walls needed repair after rain, gates required timber, ditches had to be cleared, and watchmen had to be fed. The communes sent laborers, masons, soldiers, and provisions towards threatened points, even when such contributions strained their own resources. Bells behind city walls announced approaching riders, fires marked signals after dark, and councils argued over the placement of towers. The alliance remained imperfect, but its fortresses gave it continuity. Each defended settlement allowed the League to endure between royal expeditions, and each season of endurance made Frederick's broad legal claims harder to turn into daily government. At Alessandria, sunlight touched the upper courses of the walls before reaching the streets below. Moisture remained in the joints between stones, cool beneath the fingers of masons inspecting the mortar. Wooden platforms creaked as workers carried baskets upwards, and ropes tightened with a low groan around heavy loads. In a yard near the gate, crossbow strings were stretched in the sun, their fibers gradually losing the dampness gathered during the night. Children carried small bundles of kindling, while older men watched the road with the stillness of people accustomed to distant danger. The city smelled of lime, horses, bread, and rain-soaked timber. Beyond its walls, the dusty roads between Lombard towns waited for another imperial season. Frederick returned to Italy in 1174 with an army intended to break the coalition. His arrival reminded the communes that the years since 1167 had not ended the conflict. The emperor remained determined to recover his authority, and the imperial army again moved through the northern landscape, gathering supplies and pressing towards the fortified settlements. The League's careful consolidation would now be tested under direct attack. Alessandria became the focus of Frederick's campaign, partly because of its strategic position and partly because its name proclaimed support for Alexander III. If the city could be taken, the emperor might weaken both the military structure and the political meaning of the alliance. Rain had recently passed over Alessandria when the siege towers approached, leaving the ground dark and yielding beneath their wheels. Wet stone beneath the towers shone like dull metal, and mud clung to the rims of the massive timbers. Ropes creaked under strain as men hauled the structures forwards, while oxen lowered their heads against the harness. From the walls, defenders watched through gaps between battlements, hearing the distant thud of carpentry and the dull impact of stones. Smoke drifted from cook fires within the city, mixing with the smell of wet earth and horse sweat. At night, the tower stood as black shapes against the clouds, and lamps along the ramparts glimmered in answer. The imperial siege of Alessandria in 1174 and 1175 failed. Frederick's army surrounded the city and attempted to force its surrender, but the defenders resisted through hunger, bombardment, sorties, and the stubborn use of walls prepared for precisely such a moment. The siege consumed time and provisions, while the coalition watched the emperor's attention become fixed upon one fortified settlement. Alessandria survived, and its survival carried importance far beyond the immediate safety of its inhabitants. The city demonstrated that a commune supported by the League could withstand an imperial army, even when that army possessed greater resources and a celebrated commander. Frederick had intended to break the coalition at Alessandria, yet the prolonged siege instead revealed the limits of his position. Inside the city, damp straw covered the floors of crowded houses, and the narrow streets held the odor of smoke, grain, and human fatigue. Rainwater ran from roof edges into wooden tubs, while wounded men rested beneath rough blankets near the churches. Grain was measured carefully, and every loaf carried the weight of several decisions. On the walls, defenders leaned against cold stone and listened to the siege outside. The groan of wagon wheels carrying provisions sounded beyond the enemy lines, sometimes faintly, sometimes close enough to raise hope. Bells rang behind city walls at changing hours, marking prayer, warning, and the ordinary passage of time. Even during the siege, Alessandria remained a city rather than merely a fortress. Frederick's military position weakened when promised reinforcements from Germany failed to arrive in sufficient strength. The emperor's campaign depended upon gathering men from lands far beyond the Lombard plain, and distance turned promises into uncertainty. Roads were long, seasons changed, and powerful nobles weighed their own interests before answering a summons. Every absent contingent altered the calculation around Alessandria. The imperial army remained dangerous, but its expected strength became less certain, and the communes gained confidence from knowing that Frederick could not summon unlimited force whenever he wished. Siege ended without the decisive result he had sought, leaving the coalition intact, and the emperor compelled to consider a wider campaign under increasingly difficult conditions. After rain, the roads became pale again as the sun drew moisture from the packed earth. Dust gathered on the hooves of cavalry horses and rose in thin veils behind the supply trains. Wagons carrying provisions moved slowly, their wheels complaining at every rut, while drivers called to oxen with tired patience. Along the roadside, grass bent beneath the weight of dampness, and small pools reflected the grey undersides of clouds. Messengers passed in both directions, carrying sealed letters whose contents could change the destination of an entire column. Near the towns, bells announced the opening of gates, and beyond the fields, the sound of hammering suggested that walls were still being repaired. The political fracture within Frederick's camp became clearer through the refusal of Henry, the Lion, to support the campaign in Italy in 1176. Henry was Frederick's powerful cousin and the Duke of Saxony and Bavaria, a man whose influence and military resources were considerable. His refusal has often been remembered as a dramatic betrayal, but the event can be understood more quietly as a fracture within the political structure upon which imperial expeditions depended. Henry had his own interests, rivalries, lands, and calculations. Frederick's authority could command much, yet it could not erase the independence of a prince powerful enough to withhold support. The emperor therefore entered the decisive campaign with fewer resources than his legal position seemed to promise. In the northern evening, the air cooled along ditches and low hedges, while the last warmth remained upon the stones of the road. Men gathered beneath trees to divide bread, sharpen blades, and inspect the leather straps of their shields. A servant brushed dust from a horse's flank, and the animal's skin trembled beneath the cloth. Small fires burned beside the wagons, their smoke drifting horizontally in the still air. From a nearby village came the low ringing of bells, followed by the creak of a cart leaving through the gate. News of Henry, the lion moved from tent to tent without loud accusation. Faces turned towards the dark road, then returned to the tasks immediately before them. The Lombard League prepared for the campaign knowing that its members still differed in ambition. Milan, Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, Brescia, and Bologna did not become a single state, and no permanent harmony replaced their ordinary politics. Their cooperation remained conditional, practical, and often tense. City militias assembled beneath their own banners, while commanders negotiated over roads, provisions, and the order of movement. The League's strength lay not in perfect unity, but in preserving enough unity at the necessary moment. Its cities could compete in ordinary politics and still stand together when imperial intervention threatened their autonomy. Across the plain, summer brightness rested upon tiled roofs and pale walls. Leather shields dried in courtyards, and the smell of oil rose from workshops where weapons were rubbed and repaired. Crossbow strings hung from beams in long rows, drying in the sun after being treated against dampness. Bakers carried baskets towards the gates, while women filled jars at wells and watched the soldiers pass without speaking. Dusty roads between Lombard towns stretched towards the horizon, marked by hoofprints and the parallel grooves of wheels. From distant settlements came intermittent bells, each sound softened by the open land. Beneath the ordinary movement of people and animals, the whole region seemed to be waiting. On 29 May 1176, the imperial army fought the Lombard League at Legnano. The battle began within a landscape of roads, fields, hedges, and low ground familiar to men who had spent years defending their communes. Frederick's army possessed cavalry and experienced soldiers, while the League relied heavily upon city militias, whose homes and liberties stood immediately behind them. The encounter became a test of whether communal resistance could withstand a concentrated imperial force. At Legnano, the question was not simply which banner would remain visible at sunset. It concerned whether an emperor traveling intermittently through Italy could compel obedience from cities capable of defending themselves together. Near Legnano, the morning carried the dry scent of grass and trampled earth. Banners lifted unevenly in the wind, their colors dulled by dust, rising beneath marching feet. Shields knocked against one another as men formed ranks, and horses stamped at flies gathering around their eyes. Cavalry harness creaked, spear shafts tapped against armor, and crossbow strings gave small, taut sounds as they were tested. Farther off, wagon wheels carrying provisions rolled over the hard road, each turn producing a deep wooden groan. The sun climbed slowly, drawing moisture from the low places. By evening, mist would gather over the fields near Legnano, but for the moment the plain held its breath beneath the noise of assembling armies. The imperial army was defeated at Legnano. Frederick's troops pressed against the League's formation, but the communal forces held together with a steadiness that prevented the imperial attack from becoming decisive. The city militia's defensive formation gave the soldiers a point around which they could organize their resistance, and the fighting remained bound to the discipline of men protecting their own communities. The defeat did not destroy the empire, nor did it transform Frederick into a powerless ruler. It did, however, make a negotiated settlement necessary. The emperor could continue to claim authority, but he could no longer assume that a royal expedition would automatically convert legal claims into obedience. The field changed character as the hours passed, becoming marked by broken shafts, torn cloth, and dark impressions where many feet had crossed the grass. Dust settled upon helmets and brows, while the smell of sweat, leather, and disturbed soil thickened around the lines. Horses moved nervously among abandoned equipment, and wounded men called from places hidden by the uneven ground. The clash of shields faded into scattered sounds, then into the distant creak of wagons removing the injured. Evening mist over the fields near Legnano softened the outlines of banners and trees. It moved quietly across the battlefield, covering the signs of victory and defeat with the same pale veil. In later Italian memory, Legnano became a symbol of communal resistance. The battle could be recalled whenever the liberties of cities were contrasted with the ambitions of distant rulers, and its meaning grew beyond the immediate circumstances of 1176. The League's victory offered a story in which ordinary civic forces, imperfectly united, could resist an emperor whose authority appeared greater in law than in practical reach. Yet the memory did not require the empire to vanish. Legnano mattered because it compelled recognition, not because it abolished kingship. The battle entered Italy's political imagination as a reminder that walls, councils, militia formations, and agreements could place limits upon a ruler accustomed to speaking in the language of universal authority. Night spread across the Lombard fields, and the remaining fires shone beside carts and shelters. The grass was cold beneath the feet of men carrying water, bandages, and bundles of clothing. A broken spear lay beside a shallow ditch, its wood darkened by moisture. From the direction of a town, bells rang slowly, perhaps for the dead, perhaps to mark the closing of the gates. Mist drifted over the low ground, touching wagon wheels and gathering upon the edges of shields. The air smelled of crushed herbs, wet leather, and ashes. Far from the field, other towns slept behind their walls, listening to the faint movement of returning soldiers. Frederick's struggle with the communes lasted roughly 2 decades, extending across several expeditions, truces, campaigns, embassies, and changes in political circumstance. Neither side could secure everything it desired. The communes could not simply remove the empire from Italy, while the emperor could not permanently govern the cities through force alone. The conflict showed the limits of an empire that possessed broad legal claims, but depended upon intermittent royal expeditions. Authority required presence, and presence required resources that could not be summoned indefinitely. Each absence left room for the communes to hold assemblies, repair fortifications, collect taxes, appoint officials, and settle disputes according to their own customs. In quieter seasons, the roads between Lombard towns resumed their ordinary traffic. Farmers carried baskets towards markets, merchants protected their goods beneath patched awnings, and pilgrims moved beside streams whose surfaces reflected the pale morning. Dust settled on milestones and wagon spokes, while rain returned to the hollows near the ditches. In workshops, iron cooled beside anvils, and crossbow strings were stored carefully away from moisture. The bells behind city walls continued their daily work, announcing hours that belonged to civic life rather than imperial ceremony. Even when soldiers remained nearby, the plain gradually returned to agriculture, trade, prayer, and the measured movement of people between walled communities. The negotiations that followed Legnano developed slowly. because the settlement had to reconcile two forms of authority that neither side could entirely abandon. Frederick remained emperor, and the empire survived the defeat. The communes, however, had demonstrated that their political practices could not be erased by a single campaign. They possessed officials, courts, revenues, militias, and traditions of collective decision-making that had become too deeply rooted to surrender without further struggle. Pope Alexander III remained associated with the coalition, and the memory of Alessandria continued to bind the military and political aspects of resistance. The road from Legnano to agreement was therefore not a simple surrender by one side, but an adjustment forced by years of exhaustion and mutual dependence. Winter rain darkened the stones of the meeting places, and cold air moved through courtyards where envoys waited beneath covered walks. Cloaks steamed gently when their wearers entered warm rooms, bringing with them the smell of wet wool and road dust. Wax candles softened in their sockets, and ink thickened upon pens left too near the chill. Outside, horses lowered their heads beside troughs, while wagon wheels stood sunk in soft ground. Bells sounded behind city walls at evening, their notes passing across roofs glazed with rain. The negotiations unfolded amid these ordinary details, without the brilliance of a single triumph. Words, seals, and carefully measured concessions carried the work that armies had failed to complete. The Peace of Constance in 1183 recognized the Lombard League and granted important concessions to the communes. Imperial authority survived, but it survived by accepting municipal freedoms that Frederick had once sought to restrict. The cities retained meaningful control over their officials, laws, revenues, and local administration, while the emperor's legal position was preserved in forms that could coexist with practical autonomy. The settlement did not make Milan, Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, Brescia, Bologna, and Alessandria identical in power or intention. It gave them recognition as communities whose liberties could not be treated as temporary disobedience. The Lombard League emerged from the agreement as a recognized political force, shaped by resistance and sustained through compromise. At Constance, damp stone cooled beneath the hands of guards standing near the entrances. Envoys crossed polished floors carrying folded documents, and the soft scrape of their shoes mingled with murmured conversation. Rain traveled down the outer walls in narrow threads, gathering in the seams of the pavement. Beyond the buildings, carts moved through the streets, their wheels striking shallow puddles with a regular splash. The smell of wax, wet leather, and extinguished hearths remained in the air. Bells marked the hours behind the walls, indifferent to the importance of the words being exchanged. The peace was made in rooms where the weather could be heard beyond the shutters. The settlement at Constance did not erase the memory of disease in the Roman camp, the wet stones beneath the siege towers at Alessandria, or the banners moving across the field at Legnano. Those images remained connected across the years, showing the many ways in which imperial authority could be resisted. Disease weakened Frederick in 1167, fortified settlements preserved the League, the failed siege of Alessandria consumed the emperor's strength, and the absence of German support narrowed his options. Henry the Lion's refusal revealed the political limits of relying upon powerful princes. At Legnano, the city militias supplied the final argument. The Peace of Constance then placed that argument into law. Evening descended upon the Lombard plain, and mist gathered over fields where roads disappeared into shadow. In Alessandria, lamps appeared one by one along the walls, their reflections trembling in rainwater pooled beside the gate. Milan's towers darkened against the sky, while distant bells from Cremona and Mantua answered across the low country. The roads between the towns lay quiet, marked by wagon tracks slowly filling with water. A late cart passed beneath an arch, its wheels creaking beneath a burden of grain. Somewhere within a courtyard, a crossbow string was loosened and stored. The air carried the faint scent of stone, smoke, and wet grass. The Lombard League had begun in 1167 as resistance to Frederick's imperial program, but its deeper significance lay in the political habits it made visible. Cities that often competed with one another in ordinary politics could cooperate when their autonomy was threatened. They could disagree without dissolving immediately, contribute resources without becoming a single government, and maintain fortified settlements without surrendering their separate identities. The League's history showed that resistance did not require perfect unity. It required enough shared purpose to endure the intervals between dangers, enough material organization to survive an imperial expedition, and enough patience to convert military uncertainty into negotiated recognition. The last light rested upon the wet stones of a village bridge, and the stream below carried small waves towards darker fields. Smoke rose vertically from chimneys where evening meals were being prepared. Within the walls, animals shifted in their stalls, shutters closed, and lamps illuminated narrow tables crowded with bread and bowls. A bell rang once, then allowed the quiet to return. Along the road, the marks of wagons carrying provisions remained visible beneath the fading light, though the wheels themselves had gone. Beyond the hedges, mist gathered over the fields near Legnano, and the plain seemed to hold together every road, wall, camp, and city that had shaped the long struggle. Frederick's authority therefore survived by accepting limits. The empire remained broad in theory, dignified in ceremony, and capable of influencing the affairs of Italy. Yet the Peace of Constance in 1183 confirmed that the communes could not be reduced to obedient instruments of a distant ruler. Milan, Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, Brescia, Bologna, and Alessandria retained the civic life the League had defended. Alexander III's support remained part of the story, while Legnano became a lasting symbol of communal resistance. The conflict had lasted roughly 2 decades, and its conclusion rested not upon the disappearance of imperial power, but upon its adjustment to the reality of municipal freedom. Night settled fully over the plain, leaving only scattered points of light behind the walls. The roads between Lombard towns became pale lines beneath the stars, and the damp earth cooled beneath the quiet. Wagon wheels rested beside barns, their spokes dark with moisture, while ropes and harness hung from wooden pegs to dry until morning. The bells behind city walls fell silent one after another. In Alessandria, the walls remained firm beneath the night air, bearing the name of Alexander III and the memory of a siege that had failed. Near Legnano, mist concealed the fields, while above them the darkness held the patient shape of history, extending beyond every campaign and every season. The papacy was divided, and across the Western Christian world, an unsettling question traveled with every messenger. How could one church possess 2 popes? You stand beneath the pale morning sky of Rome, where the streets carry different rumors towards different palaces, and where each bell seems to answer another. The air tastes of dust and distant rain. Along the roads, clerks fold letters into leather cases, while armed riders wait beside tired horses. No single voice governs the prayers of the faithful, and no simple declaration can settle which pontiff bears the authority of St. Peter. In the northern towns, merchants repeat the names Alexander and Victor beside their measures of grain. In imperial halls, the same names are spoken with guarded patience, as though each syllable might summon another campaign. The division reaches beyond Rome, crossing mountains, kingdoms, and the careful boundaries of obedience. Even the quietest monastery must decide which seal to honor when a letter arrives. Frederick's conflict with the papacy had begun soon after his election, although its causes were older than his reign and wider than any single quarrel. You follow the imperial road southwards, where the Alps recede behind you and the Italian plains open beneath a milky afternoon. The road is pale with dust, and travelling carts press two dark lines into its surface. Horses breathe heavily beneath their harness, carrying chests of clothing, rolls of parchment, and sealed instructions for distant officials. Around you, the empire does not appear as one uninterrupted country, but as a chain of loyalties, roads, fortresses, bishoprics, and cities. Frederick's authority must be carried into each place by ceremony, negotiation, and force. The Italian wars become intertwined with the struggle over the Roman Church, until neither conflict can be cleanly separated from the other. Every fortress has a political meaning, and every ecclesiastical decision may alter the balance of arms. Pope Adrian IV had sometimes supported imperial authority, especially when order and lawful hierarchy appeared to depend upon it. You enter a church where light falls through narrow windows onto worn stone, and the morning service moves slowly beneath painted arches. A bishop's staff rests against a pillar, its metal head dulled by years of handling. Incense hangs in the still air, mingling with wax and damp wool. Adrian IV understood the usefulness of an emperor who could restrain disorder, protect roads, and enforce decisions across territories where papal power alone could not reach. Yet the same pope defended the independence of the Roman Church whenever imperial authority threatened to become its master. His support was therefore never a surrender, and his concessions never erased the boundary between secular rule and ecclesiastical freedom. Beneath the measured language of letters, both sides guarded ancient claims, each believing that the peace of Christendom required its own dignity to be preserved. Adrian IV died in 1159, during a period of competing expectations surrounding the papacy. You pass beneath the shadow of a Roman tower as evening gathers, and the stones retain the day's warmth beneath your hand. A thin wind moves through the narrow streets, carrying cooking smoke, horse sweat, and river mud. Messengers arrive from the north with reports of imperial movements, while Roman families listen for news from the cardinals. Adrian's death does not create the divisions by itself, but it removes the figure who had contained them for a time. The papal election of 1159 produces two claims, two obediences, and two versions of lawful continuity. Alexander III receives the support of many cardinals, while Victor IV emerges as an antipope supported by the emperor. The schism is not an abstract dispute in distant theology. It enters courts, monasteries, military councils, and the daily habits of prayer. At the edge of the lagoon, the land begins to loosen into water. You stand near a landing place at dawn, where oars pass through Venetian water with a soft, regular sound. Salt air cools your face, and the wooden posts beneath the quay are dark with moisture. Boats move between islands like slow shadows, carrying envoys, servants, merchants, and bundles wrapped against the spray. Silk banners stir above the vessels, their colors paling and deepening as the light changes. The city seems to float between earth and sky, and every approach to it requires a change in rhythm. Horses cannot carry an embassy through the final streets, nor can siege towers advance across the channels. Here, diplomacy arrives by boat, measured by tide, wind, and the patience of rowers. The waters make Venice feel protected, yet they also make every gathering visible, public, and rich with ceremony. Frederick supported Victor IV, and after Victor's death, he supported further antipopes against Alexander III. You watch imperial envoys leave the quay beneath a canopy of crimson cloth, their shoes leaving small marks of water on the polished boards. The delegation carries documents bearing wax seals, but the seals cannot quiet the deeper uncertainty. Behind the envoys, stewards count chests, and clerks guard lists of names written in cramped Latin. Ahead, the canals reflect fragments of towers and banners, breaking authority into wavering shapes. Alexander III remains recognized by many Western rulers and by the Lombard League, whose cities resist Frederick's attempts to impose a stronger imperial presence in northern Italy. The emperor's chosen pontiffs possess ceremony and military protection, but Alexander possesses an international obedience that cannot be dismissed. Thus the schism continues, sustained by armies, alliances, legal arguments, and the stubborn memory of earlier elections. Nearly 2 decades pass beneath this divided sky, while every side insists that it is defending unity. The years of conflict gather weight in the bodies of men and animals. You travel beside a column of carts at midday, with canvas covers trembling under the heat and wheels complaining over the broken road. The plains smell of dry grass, leather, and smoke from distant settlements. Soldiers lean against their spears when the column pauses, while clerks sit beneath a tree and compare lists of obligations. One town promises supplies, another refuses, and a third appeals to ancient privilege. Frederick's Italian program has demanded obedience, taxation, fortification, and the restoration of imperial rights. The papal conflict gives those demands a sacred sharpness, making compromise appear dangerous to men who fear that any concession will be remembered as defeat. Alexander's supporters likewise interpret the struggle as a defense of the Roman Church against domination. The longer the war continues, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish principle from habit or justice from the pride of rulers. At Legnano in 1176, the imperial army suffers a defeat that changes the atmosphere of the entire dispute. You stand beside a field after rain, where flattened grass gives off a green, bitter scent, and dark water gathers in the wheel ruts. The distant road is quiet, except for wounded men moving slowly and the occasional clatter of loose harness. Banners that had seemed permanent now lie folded beneath mud-stained cloaks. The Lombard League has shown that the imperial army cannot simply compel the northern communes into obedience through repeated campaigns. Frederick's position is weakened, while Alexander III's political standing is strengthened by the result. Reconciliation becomes more urgent because victory is no longer a realistic language for the empire. The defeat does not erase Frederick's authority, but it narrows the choices available to him. A war that once promised restoration now threatens to become a permanent drain upon the crown. Evening settles gently over the Venetian channels. You hear oars beyond the quay, each stroke entering the dark water and lifting a narrow thread of silver. The lagoon carries algae, tar, wet timber, and the faint sense of distant kitchens. Along the facades, lamps appear one by one, their reflections trembling beneath the boats. Silk banners stir above a temporary pavilion, their folds rustling like pages turning in a library. Officials cross courtyards on quiet errands, carrying messages from one chamber to another. The water receives every sound and returns it softened. Behind the formal buildings, lesser streets grow dim, while gondolas pass without voices. The city's geography does not remove tension, but it gives tension a slower shape. Here, no one can move quickly from argument to violence, because every journey passes through narrow water and public space. Negotiations involving the papacy, the Lombard League, the Kingdom of Sicily, and the Empire take place in Venice in 1177. You move through a corridor where envoys from different lands wait beneath painted ceilings, their clothing marked by small distinctions of rank and custom. The room smells of beeswax, damp stone, and wool warmed by many bodies. Venetian officials pass quietly between groups, carrying cups of watered wine and folded notes. The papal representatives speak for Alexander III, while imperial delegates preserve Frederick's dignity and defend the rights that can still be maintained. The Lombard League brings the practical strength of the northern communes, and the Kingdom of Sicily stands as another necessary participant in the balance of Italian power. No party arrives without grievances, and no party can afford to leave without some recognition. Venice offers neutral ground in a political sense, though its own interests remain carefully protected. The city's wealth and maritime confidence lend the discussions a grandeur beyond the military camps of earlier years. The language of the negotiations turns slowly from accusation towards settlement. You sit near an open window overlooking the water, where the evening tide rises against the stone steps. Outside, boats carry servants home beneath darkening arches. Candle smoke curls above the table, gathering beneath the ceiling before disappearing into colder air. Parchment lies beside silver weights, signet rings, and small knives used to cut sealing wax. Each clause must carry more than one meaning, since emperors, bishops, communes, and future jurists will read it. Frederick must recognize Alexander III as the legitimate pope from the imperial side, while Alexander must receive that recognition without turning it into public humiliation. The Lombard League requires security, the papacy requires restored possessions, and the empire requires its rights to remain visible. Around you, diplomacy advances through pauses, corrections, and the patient drying of ink. The Peace of Venice recognizes Alexander III as the legitimate pope on Frederick's behalf. You stand in a chamber where the completed parchment rests upon a table, its ink drying beneath the warmth of nearby candles. The writing appears dark and deliberate, though the agreement behind it has been shaped by years of uncertainty, battle, and grief. The settlement ends the major papal imperial schism associated with Frederick's reign, closing a division that had placed competing popes before the Western Christian world. Frederick promises to restore possessions taken from the Roman Church, while preserving imperial rights as specified in the settlement. The wording does not make the emperor powerless, nor does it transform Alexander into an unquestioned master of every temporal matter. Instead, the document creates a recognized boundary within which both authorities may continue. The peace is therefore neither a simple victory nor an act of surrender. It is a dignified retreat from endless conflict, made possible by exhaustion and the need for a future. The public reconciliation between emperor and pope becomes the most remembered image of Venice. You cross a broad square where the last daylight rests upon church stone, and footsteps echo beneath the arcades. Bells sound across the city at dusk, their voices overlapping above water and rooftops. Silk banners stir along the buildings, while citizens gather behind barriers to see the figures whose dispute has shaped Italian politics for nearly 20 years. Contemporary accounts describe a public meeting between Frederick and Alexander III, although the precise gestures vary by source. Some accounts emphasize the emperor's submission before the pope, while others preserve a more measured ceremony in which rank and reconciliation are carefully balanced. Later retellings may have enlarged the drama, arranging the scene into a simple picture of triumph. The reliable center remains quieter. Emperor and pope meet publicly, acknowledge a settlement, and allow the divided church to appear whole again. You are close enough to see the movement of robes and the small adjustments of men who must stand precisely where ceremony requires. The stone beneath your feet is smooth from generations of passing steps, and the lagoon wind reaches the square carrying salt and coolness. A bell sounds from a tower, then fades into the layered murmur of the crowd. Candle smoke rises from a nearby chapel, mingling with wet stone and pressed fabric. Alexander's attendants remain close, their red and white garments bright against the evening shadows. Frederick's household forms its own pattern of dark cloaks, polished metal, and embroidered sleeves. The gestures are difficult to see clearly from a distance, and each witness understands them according to allegiance. What remains in the air is not theatrical certainty, but the careful stillness that follows a dangerous decision. The meeting must be seen, remembered, and carried into every province where the schism had once been discussed. The treaty establishes a truce with the Lombard League rather than immediately resolving every municipal dispute. You hear envoys speak in restrained tones beneath a vaulted roof, while beyond the walls the tide moves against the foundations. The agreement leaves many local questions open, including the exact reach of civic authority and the obligations owed by individual communes. No parchment can instantly reconcile every city with an emperor whose officials have demanded obedience for years. The truce nevertheless lowers the temperature of the conflict and creates time for practical arrangements. Frederick's government can now approach the northern cities without the immediate presence of a papal schism behind every negotiation. The Lombard League retains its collective importance, and the empire retains a formal claim to overlordship. Neither side receives everything sought during the campaigns. The settlement begins to redirect Italian politics away from open imperial papal war, allowing disputes to become matters of rights, revenues, and jurisdiction. The Pope and cardinals agree to receive Frederick, Beatrice, and their son Henry within the Christian political order. You observe the imperial family moving through a ceremonial space, brightened by candles, with the soft gleam of gold thread passing over the dark floor. Beatrice walks beside Frederick, and their son Henry remains within the careful orbit of attendants and guards. The arrangement gives reconciliation a dynastic dimension, since the empire is represented not only by its ruler, but by the household that will carry its memory forward. Around you, cardinals stand beneath tall columns, their robes forming quiet pools of color in the candlelight. The words of reception carry legal and spiritual force, yet they also restore a public relationship between the imperial family and the papal court. A political order that had seemed fractured is now pictured as capable of containing both pope and emperor. The gesture does not abolish rivalry, but it makes rivalry inhabitable. Venice gives the settlement a ceremonial and diplomatic grandeur that no battlefield could have provided. You pass along a quay beneath a dark blue sky, with lanterns trembling in the water and salt air settling upon the wooden railings. Boats carry officials beneath bridges where the sound of their passage becomes briefly hollow. Silk banners move above palace entrances, their edges lifting and falling in the breeze. Somewhere behind the houses, a musician tests a quiet phrase, and the notes dissolve among bells and footsteps. The city's wealth is present in polished stone, colored glass, carved doorways, and elaborate clothing. Yet the most powerful feature of the scene is its instability. Water lies beneath every threshold, and reflections shift whenever a boat passes. Venice makes authority appear splendid, though never entirely solid, and the settlement shares that quality. After Venice, the political landscape of Italy is altered without becoming peaceful in every corner. You leave the lagoon by a road bordered with reeds, where morning mist hangs low over fields and canals. The smell of wet earth replaces the salt air, and small birds stir among the grasses. Letters travel more freely between courts because the central papal imperial obstruction has been removed. Alexander III is no longer the object of an imperial refusal, and Frederick can present himself as a ruler who has chosen settlement without abandoning honor. The Peace of Venice redirects Italian politics away from open imperial papal war, but it does not prevent later disputes between emperors, popes, cities, and nobles. The change lies in the available language. Appeals can now be made to written privileges, customary rights, and negotiated obligations, rather than only to banners and sieges. The peace opens a corridor through which practical politics may proceed. The memory of Legnano remains within that new corridor. You walk across a field in late summer, where dry stalks brush your boots, and the light turns distant roofs a muted gold. The wind carries no battle cry, only the creak of a cart and the faint ringing of a shepherd's bell. Frederick's defeat has not destroyed him, but it has taught his government the cost of demanding uniform obedience from cities whose strength is rooted in local institutions. The emperor can still claim authority over northern Italy, and the imperial title continues to possess solemn force. Yet the means of exercising that authority must change. A truce becomes more useful than another siege, and written recognition may achieve more than a new procession of troops. The empire is not reduced to a symbol, but its power becomes more visibly dependent upon cooperation. The lesson of Legnano settles slowly, like dust after a passing column. Years later, the road leads towards Constance, where another settlement will give the Venetian peace its practical completion. You approach the city beneath a grey sky, hearing wagon wheels turn over packed earth and church bells answer from the walls. The air carries river water, grain and smoke from tiled chimneys. Delegations arrive from Lombard communes with bundles of charters, seals, and carefully memorized grievances. Imperial representatives bring their own records, claiming revenues, judicial rights, and the ancient dignity of the crown. The cities do not come as conquered villages, because their wealth, walls, and organized councils have already made them political powers. Frederick does not come as a ruler without resources, since the empire still contains princes, bishops, armies, and traditions of obedience. Constance becomes the place where the truce can be translated into a durable arrangement. The Peace of Constance in 1183 settles the conflict with the Lombard communes. Within the city, negotiations unfold among stone buildings whose walls preserve the cold of the season. You stand beside a table crowded with parchment, where ink dries slowly in the still air and candle smoke bends beneath a draught. Clerks compare formulas, measuring the difference between a privilege granted by favor and a right recognized by law. Outside, footsteps echo along church stone as messengers carry drafts from one chamber to another. The communes seek practical freedom to govern their own affairs, raise revenues, administer justice, and manage local institutions. Frederick preserves a formal claim to imperial overlordship, because abandoning it would weaken the structure of kingship itself. The settlement therefore joins two kinds of authority within the same document. The cities retain substantial self-government while acknowledging the emperor's superior position. Neither side receives an entirely separate world, and both accept that political life must continue through overlapping rights. The Peace of Constance allows Lombard cities to govern much of their daily life in their own names. You enter a municipal square at noon, where market voices rise beneath awnings and the smell of bread, leather, onions, and river mud moves between the stalls. Bells mark the divisions of the working day, and local officials cross the paving stones with bundles of records under their arms. The city's councils, customs, and courts remain close to the people who depend upon them. Imperial authority still exists above these arrangements, expressed through allegiance, formal recognition, and the rights retained by the crown. Yet the practical administration of the commune is not erased by that superior claim. The settlement acknowledges that a city may be both self-governing and subject to an emperor. This layered arrangement appears untidy when measured against the idea of a single central state. In Frederick's world, however, such complexity is not an accident, but a method of survival. The waters of Venice and the stone of Constance now belong to the same political memory. You sit beside a river at dusk, feeling cool air gather along the bank, while distant bells sound across the city. The surface carries broken reflections of roofs, bridges, and passing lamps. In imagination, the boats of Venice still move through the lagoon, and silk banners continue above the embassies. Treaty parchment rests in a chest somewhere, its ink darkened by time, while the clauses remain active in courts and councils. Peace is not silence imposed upon every dispute. It is a framework that allows disagreements to continue without requiring each one to become a war. The agreements of 1177 and 1183 create such a framework for Frederick, Alexander, and the Lombard communes. Their importance lies in what they make possible after the ceremony has ended. Frederick's later government relies more on compromise and negotiated rights than his early Italian program had suggested. You follow a narrow road through vineyards and fortified towns, where autumn leaves gather in shallow ditches and wood smoke rests above the fields. Riders arrive with petitions from princes, bishops, and city officials, each asking that an existing privilege be confirmed or a disputed boundary clarified. The emperor's authority is exercised through recognition of particular arrangements, not merely through general commands sent from a distant center. A charter can bind a city more securely than a garrison if the city sees its rights preserved within the imperial order. A bishop may support the crown because his jurisdiction is confirmed, while a prince may cooperate because his ancient privileges are respected. The empire continues through personal presence, written memory, and negotiated allegiance. Its strength is real, though distributed across many hands. A cool wind moves through the streets after rain, touching the stones and lifting the odor of wet leaves. You hear footsteps beneath an arcade, followed by the faint scrape of a cart being drawn towards a covered market. Candle smoke drifts from a chapel door, and the flame inside trembles whenever someone enters. On a nearby wall, a strip of faded silk clings to a metal bracket, its color softened by seasons of weather. The city contains many authorities at once: a bishop's household, a merchant council, a noble family, a royal official, and the ordinary customs of neighbors. None possesses the whole landscape, yet each occupies a recognizable place within it. Bells across the city do not announce a single command. They mark a shared rhythm in which different institutions, communities, and loyalties continue beside one another. The settlements do not make the empire centralized, and they do not transform Frederick into a ruler able to govern every district by direct instruction. You stand at a crossroads where several roads leave the town, each leading towards a different lordship, bishopric, commune, or royal residence. The ground is firm beneath your feet, while the evening air carries hay and distant rain. Power travels along these roads in different forms. A prince holds authority through inheritance and custom, a bishop through office and land, a commune through its citizens and institutions, and the emperor through kingship, law, ceremony, and the loyalty of those who accept his supremacy. The empire is a layered political order of kings, princes, bishops, and communes. Its unity does not depend upon identical administration. It depends upon the ability of many forms of authority to recognize one another within a larger hierarchy. At night, the memory of Venice becomes quiet and almost weightless. You are again near the lagoon, where cool salt air moves over water, holding the dark outlines of buildings. Oars rest inside the boats, and their blades drip slowly into the channels. Silk banners hang without movement, their folds heavy in the dampness. A last group of footsteps fades from the church square before it empties. Somewhere, candle smoke remains suspended in a chamber where an oath has already been spoken and witnessed. The treaty parchment lies closed, its ink no longer wet, while the decisions recorded upon it begin their long life in memory. The splendor of the ceremony has faded, but the restraint required to reach it remains. Alexander III's recognition brings an end to the great papal imperial schism associated with Frederick's reign. You move through a monastery garden in the early morning, where droplets cling to herbs and paths are pale beneath a thin veil of mist. A scribe opens a letter and reads the imperial acceptance aloud, each word measured against the fears of earlier years. The surrounding walls are cool, and the air smells of damp soil, crushed mint, and ash from the kitchen fire. For many Western rulers, Alexander had already been the recognized pope, and the Lombard League had defended his position alongside its own political cause. Frederick's recognition, therefore, confirms a reality that years of war had failed to undo. Yet recognition from an emperor matters, because it closes the remaining official division at the highest level. The papacy can again present one head to the Christian world, while the empire can return to its secular contests without maintaining a rival pontiff. In the years after Constance, the emperor's authority continues to move rather than settle into one fixed center. You travel through mountain passes, river crossings, walled towns, and open fields, with the imperial household forming a temporary court wherever it pauses. Rain darkens an inn's roof, and the smell of horses rises from the stable below. Documents are read beside traveling chests, and decisions are sealed beneath whatever roof can shelter the court. Frederick's empire is mobile because its ruler must meet the people whose cooperation gives his title practical force. The road becomes part of government, connecting distant territories without dissolving their separate customs. At one place, a bishop receives the emperor with bells and incense. At another, a commune offers provisions and petitions. Each meeting renews the hierarchy while revealing its dependence upon local consent. Imperial government is therefore a journey through relationships. The political order created at Venice and Constance remains delicate, but delicacy is not the same as weakness. You stand beneath a wooden roof during a summer storm, listening to rain strike the tiles in a broad, soothing rhythm. Water runs from the eaves into the courtyard, carrying leaves and fragments of straw towards a drain. Inside, a clerk warms his hands near a brazier, while another bends over parchment whose ink has begun to dry. The arrangement between emperor and cities can be tested by new taxes, disputed officials, or memories of old violence. Even so, the settlements provide language for repairing the strain. A city can point to a charter, a bishop can cite a precedent, and the emperor can invoke a recognized right. Written agreements become bridges across spaces where suspicion might otherwise grow into armed resistance. They do not remove uncertainty, but they prevent uncertainty from having only one answer. You pass through another Venetian evening, where the lagoon darkens beneath bridges and cool air gathers around the quays. Boats lie close together, their ropes creaking softly against the posts. Farther out, a solitary lantern moves towards the open channels. Salt gathers on the stone steps, and tar rises faintly from the hulls. Above the palace roofs, banners stir in a breeze that has not entirely died. In the distance, a bell touches the water with a low, patient note. The place where Frederick and Alexander met has become more than a remembered square. It represents the moment when rulers who had claimed absolute right accepted limits imposed by circumstance. Their peace is solemn because it does not pretend that conflict has vanished. It simply allows history to continue without another campaign. From Venice, the road leads towards the later calm of Constance. You walk beside a quiet river beneath a sky the color of old silver, hearing water move around stones and reeds. The banks are soft after rain, and fallen leaves collect beneath the roots of willow trees. In the city ahead, councillors prepare records of local freedoms, while imperial officials review the formal claims of the crown. The Peace of Constance will not create a single administrative system for Lombardy. It will permit the cities to retain substantial self-government while acknowledging imperial overlordship. That balance reflects the political realities revealed by decades of war. Frederick can preserve the dignity of the empire without pretending that every commune can be turned into a directly governed province. The cities can preserve their institutions without declaring themselves entirely outside the imperial world. Between those positions lies the practical peace of 1183. The echo of footsteps on church stone grows softer as the day ends. You stand near a doorway where the last light touches the threshold, and the stone beneath you holds the warmth of afternoon. A small flame burns beside an image of a saint, sending smoke into the still interior. Outside, the square empties gradually, leaving only a few voices beneath the arcades. The agreements of Venice and Constance have no single sound, because each party hears a different promise within them. The Pope hears restored ecclesiastical possessions and the end of imperial support for rival pontiffs. The Emperor hears preserved imperial rights and the recovery of a workable political position. The Lombard communes hear protection for local government, revenues, and customs. The Kingdom of Sicily hears a reduction in the danger of a united imperial papal offensive. Peace gathers these meanings without making them identical. Frederick's reign, therefore, ends this chapter of Italian conflict through negotiation, ceremony, and carefully maintained ambiguity. You watch evening settle over a road where travelers continue towards different destinations, their lamps appearing briefly between the trees. The air is cool, and damp leather rises from saddles and harness. A distant bell marks the hour, while somewhere beyond the fields, a cart rolls slowly towards a village gate. Nothing in the landscape suggests a centralized empire stretching evenly across every mile. Instead, authority appears in layers, carried by charters, oaths, inheritances, privileges, cities, churches, and the presence of the emperor himself. Venice has ended the major papal imperial schism, and Constance has settled the conflict with the Lombard communes. Together, the settlements show an empire that is negotiated, mobile, and layered rather than uniformly controlled. The waters around Venice continue their slow movement beneath the dark, indifferent to the titles spoken upon the quays. You rest beside the lagoon as night deepens, listening to a distant oar enter the water and rise again beyond the line of lamps. Salt air moves across your face, and the wooden platform beneath you gives a faint creak with the changing tide. Silk banners hang above the silent buildings, no longer bright, but still recognizable in the darkness. The square is empty, and the rooms where envoys once waited hold only the fading trace of candle smoke. The peace remains in the shape of an agreement, imperfect and durable, holding together rulers and cities that have not ceased to be different. Beyond the lagoon, roads continue through the empire, carrying new petitions, new disputes, and the patient work of preserving order. In late spring, you are approaching Mainz along roads softened by recent rain, while green river meadows stretch beneath a pale, spacious sky. Mounted nobles pass beneath bright pennants, and long carts creak under sacks of grain, barrels of wine, folded tents, and bundles of firewood. The Rhine moves quietly beside the road, carrying a soft brown reflection of the clouds. Horse sweat gathers beneath embroidered coverings, mingling with the scent of damp leather and crushed grass. Every mile brings another group towards the same city, servants walking behind mules and armed retainers guiding restless animals. Mainz waits ahead, not as a permanent palace, but as a place temporarily transformed by arrival. Frederick has called a major court assembly at Mainz during Pentecost in 1184, and the gathering begins on 20 May. The occasion follows the Peace of Constance in 1183 and the political defeat of Henry the Lion, whose long resistance had unsettled the empire. Across the roads, the consequences of those struggles now travel in quieter forms, carried by men who have come to negotiate, observe, celebrate, and be seen. The gathering is often called the Diet of Mainz, or the Court Festival of Pentecost. Its name suggests both deliberation and splendor, for Frederick's purpose is not confined to a single council chamber. He intends to display an empire assembled around him. The river meadows near Mainz are thick with spring color, their grasses shining where rain has rested on the blades. Low birds move through the reeds, and distant church bells drift across the open ground with a mild, rounded sound. Wagon wheels leave dark tracks in the earth, while hooves press shallow marks into the margins of the road. Linen awnings tremble above temporary stalls, and rain taps softly on pavilions where cooks prepare the evening meal. Beneath the coverings, fresh bread cools in woven baskets beside roasted meat, onions, turnips, and great wooden bowls of porridge. The air remains cool, though the season has begun to lean towards summer. At the center of this movement stands Frederick, whose authority is expressed through the household traveling with him. His court is not a permanent palace administration in the modern sense, fixed behind walls and governed by stationary offices. Instead, the emperor governs through a traveling household that moves between royal and episcopal centers. Clerks, chaplains, heralds, judges, servants, guards, and noble companions form a political body carried from one place to another. At Mainz, this moving household becomes larger, brighter, and more deliberate. The emperor's presence turns roads into approaches, temporary halls into courts, and ordinary hospitality into an act of government. Around you, the city fills with layered sounds that arrive from different directions and slowly become one. Smiths strike iron beside the gates, while grooms brush mud from the flanks of traveling horses. Beneath awnings, merchants open chests of cloth, gloves, belts, combs, vessels, and small ornaments suitable for men wishing to appear splendid before their peers. The smell of horse sweat lies beneath the perfume of herbs scattered across floors. Rushes are spread over crowded rooms, softening footsteps and absorbing spilled drink. From an upper window, you see pennants lifting and settling above the roofs, their colors vivid against the pale sky. Mainz seems to breathe through thousands of small preparations. Royal assemblies offer opportunities for judgments, grants, marriages, oaths, and political negotiation, while these practical matters continue beneath the visible magnificence. Petitions are carried from one room to another, sealed documents are examined by clerks, and messengers wait for answers that may alter the position of a monastery, a lordship, or a family. A marriage may be discussed beside a platter of meat, while a grant of land is confirmed beneath painted cloth. Oaths are spoken before witnesses, and careful phrases pass between men whose friendships are never entirely separate from calculation. The Peace of Constance has created a new political moment, but peace must still be interpreted, witnessed, and maintained. The late spring light rests gently on the green river meadows, where the Rhine bends beyond lines of willows and poplars. Along the banks, damp earth releases the scent of roots and water, while small flowers gather around the wheels of abandoned carts. The pale sky is crossed by slow clouds, and the river turns silver whenever the sun emerges. In the camps, woven coverings stir against their ropes, making a faint, dry rustle. Someone pours water into a wooden trough, and the liquid strikes the sides with a hollow rhythm. Farther away, trumpets test their notes, each sound traveling across the grass before dissolving into the wind. The court festival attracts princes, bishops, nobles, knights, clerics, and visitors from across the empire. Their arrival gives physical form to the political elite Frederick must gather if his authority is to remain effective. Some men come with large retinues and costly horses, while others appear with only a few companions, carefully preserving the rank their resources permit. Bishops bring chaplains and scribes, princes arrive with banners and armed followers, and clerics move between ceremony and record. Visitors from distant regions bring different accents, customs, and memories of local disputes. At Mainz, all these differences are arranged within a common order. Clothing speaks before any man has uttered a formal greeting. Woolen cloaks in deep red, blue, green, and brown fall over tunics bordered with braid, while silver clasps catch the morning brightness. Embroidery marks the edge of sleeves, the breast of a horse covering, or the long hanging of a banner. Jeweled belts and polished fittings indicate rank without requiring explanation. Servants carry folded textiles from one chamber to another, guarding them from mud and rain. Beneath the splendor, every garment must still withstand travel, wind, dust, and the press of a crowded room. The court's beauty depends upon practical labor that remains mostly unseen. Frederick's sons Henry and Conrad are present during the celebration, giving the festival a second meaning beyond immediate ceremony. Henry is already king of the Romans, having been elected in 1169, and his position announces planned continuity within the ruling house. Conrad, Duke of Swabia, is also honored during the festivities, placed within the public order of the imperial family. Their presence allows Frederick to display not only the authority he possesses, but also the succession he hopes to shape. The sons stand among princes and bishops as living signs that the reign may extend beyond the present generation. The floors beneath the temporary halls are covered with rushes, pale and fibrous, beneath the feet of people arriving from distant roads. Some rushes are dry and fragrant, while others retain the cool smell of the riverbank. Lamps burn beside pillars wrapped in cloth, and candlelight gathers on metal cups, polished buckles, and the damp edges of cloaks. From the kitchens come the aromas of fresh bread, roasted meat, garlic, wine, and hot broth. A groom moves past with a horse whose embroidered covering brushes against a wooden post. Outside, rain taps on the pavilion roofs, settling over the conversations like a fine, continuous curtain. The festival serves social and political purposes, and the two cannot easily be separated. A prince who shares a table with another may renew an alliance while appearing merely hospitable. A bishop who witnesses a judgment may strengthen a legal decision through his presence. A marriage negotiation can gain force when conducted amid the emperor's household, while an oath becomes more memorable when spoken before a gathering of the empire. Tournaments allow noblemen to demonstrate prowess while renewing relationships within the ruling class. Courage is displayed through the body, while the wider community is repaired through recognition, courtesy, rivalry, and exchange. Beyond the pavilions, the tournament ground lies flattened and bordered by wooden barriers. Rain has darkened the earth, and grass at the margins bends beneath passing feet. Bright pennants lift above the enclosure, their colors wavering against a washed-out sky. Horses stamp and toss their heads, sending warm breath into the cool air. Leather creaks as saddles are tightened, and metal fittings give small, sharp sounds as they are checked. Spectators gather beneath cloaks, carrying the smell of wet wool into the stands. Somewhere near the kitchens, bread is broken, and smoke moves low across the field. The tournaments are displays of aristocratic military culture, yet they are not simply uncontrolled battles. Violence is placed within ceremony, bounded by barriers, announced by trumpets, and observed by men who understand the rules of honor. Riders lower their lances, horses gather speed, and wooden rails clatter when the first impact comes. Dust rises where the ground has begun to dry, while fragments of wood fall beside the hooves. A fallen man is lifted, examined, and returned to his companions. The danger is real, but its meaning depends upon control. Prowess becomes useful to the ruling class when it can be witnessed, measured, praised, and contained. The afternoon grows warmer between passing showers, leaving the river meadows bright beneath breaks in the cloud. Sunlight touches the wet backs of horses and turns droplets on the grass into small points of light. The smell of sweat, rain, and trampled earth hangs around the barriers. Trumpets sound from the edge of the field, followed by the deeper clatter of wooden obstacles struck by mounted men. Servants carry cloaks away from the spectators, and pages hold vessels of water beside the waiting horses. On the pavilions, rainwater gathers along the seams before falling in slow drops onto the rush-covered ground. Ceremonial order makes hierarchy visible, and the imperial court uses that order with great care. The places nearest Frederick are not assigned by accident, nor are the sequence of greetings. the movement of gifts, or the seating at important meals. A bishop's position reflects ecclesiastical dignity, a prince's place acknowledges political weight, and a knight's distance from the centre communicates the limits of his standing. Henry and Conrad are placed within this arrangement as members of the ruling family. Each gesture contributes to a public understanding of power. At Mainz, rank is not only possessed, it is arranged, repeated, and made visible to everyone present. Evening settles across Mainz with a coolness rising from the Rhine and moving through the temporary encampments. The sky loses its brightness slowly, leaving the pennants dark against a strip of fading silver. Fires burn beneath iron pots, and smoke drifts between carts, tents, and tethered horses. Roasted meat gives off a rich scent, while loaves of fresh bread are carried from ovens in covered baskets. Musicians tune strings in one shelter, and a flute answers from another. Rain begins again, tapping on temporary pavilions and gathering in the grooves between the boards. Underfoot, the rushes soften the movement of many feet. Frederick appears not merely as a warrior, but as the center of a moving political household. His authority is carried by people, records, rituals, provisions, and the expectation that decisions can be made wherever the court arrives. The emperor's household surrounds him with the means of rule, yet it also depends upon the cooperation of those who have traveled to meet him. The splendor of Mainz rests upon a practical network of service and consent. Clerks preserve words, servants prepare food, bishops lend sacred dignity, princes offer recognition, and knights embody the martial values of the ruling class. The moving court is powerful because it is shared. At dawn, mist lies over the green river meadows near Mainz, veiling the lower branches of the willows. The first light reaches the tops of the tents before touching the wet grass below. Horses breathe heavily beside the picket lines, and their coverings show dark patches where the night's dampness has settled. A baker opens a wooden shutter, releasing the warm smell of bread into the chill air. Nearby, a servant shakes rushes from a cloak, and the dry fibers scatter across the ground. From the city, a bell begins its measured ringing, while distant trumpets answer with softer notes. The assembly displays Frederick's ability to gather the political elite after decades of conflict. The peace of Constance and the defeat of Henry, the Lion, have altered the balance of power, but neither development has erased the need for negotiation. Princes and regional powers still hold substantial influence, and the empire continues to depend on their cooperation. The brilliance of the Mainz festival should not be mistaken for complete political unity. Its splendor reveals a ruler at the height of worldly authority, yet that authority remains relational. Frederick can summon the great men of the empire, but he must still persuade, reward, accommodate, and remember them. A light wind travels along the river, carrying the smell of wet reeds, horse leather, wood smoke, and crushed meadow flowers. The water moves past in a broad, steady sheet, bearing leaves and small fragments of straw towards the distant fields. Beneath the pavilions, damp cloaks hang from wooden pegs, and beads of rain shine along their seams. Floorboards creak whenever servants cross with trays or covered jars. Somewhere beyond the hall, a child laughs once and is hushed. A horse pulls gently against its tether, making the metal ring sound against the post. Ordinary details continue beneath the ceremony. Within the crowded halls, the festival's social life gathers around food and music. Tables are covered with cloth, and vessels pass from hand to hand among men who have spent weeks traveling towards Mainz. Fresh bread is torn into pieces, roasted meat is carved with long knives, and wine is poured beneath the watchful eyes of servants. Musicians provide continuity between meals, processions, and dances, filling pauses that might otherwise expose the strain of formal behavior. Hospitality demonstrates abundance, while the order of serving confirms rank. Court splendor depends on movement, textiles, horses, food, music, visible distinction, and many quiet hands. The tournament ground is quieter after the day's contests, though broken lance shafts remain beside the wooden barriers. Mud clings to boots and horse hooves, and a faint metallic smell rises from armor left to dry beneath the shelters. The pale sky has cleared in the west, showing a thin wash of gold above the river. Pennants move slowly now, their damp cloth heavy after the rain. In the distance, servants lead tired horses towards the water, their hooves making soft impressions in the meadow. The last trumpets fade behind the walls, leaving the lower murmur of voices and the creak of carts. The later reputation of the Mainz festival helps Frederick appear as a ruler at the height of worldly authority. Chroniclers remember the gathering as one of the best-known examples of 12th century imperial magnificence, where the empire seemed to assemble in one luminous place. Such memories preserve the public image of a reign shaped by confidence, ceremony, and command. They also smooth away some uncertainty beneath the pageantry. The festival becomes a polished surface, reflecting Frederick's victories and his son's place within the dynasty. Beneath it, political relationships remain active, conditional, and capable of changing. Night returns to the riverbank, and the tents become small islands of amber light among the darkened meadows. Rain touches the pavilion roofs with a patient rhythm, sometimes soft as fingertips, and sometimes louder where drops strike stretched leather. The smell of wet wool rises from the guards' cloaks, while smoke curls low from fires sheltered behind wagons. Horses shift in the darkness, their breath pale when the clouds open briefly above them. Across the city, one door closes, then another, until only scattered voices remain. Mainz rests beneath the continuing movement of water and the quiet labor of those who keep watch. The presence of Henry and Conrad gives the celebration an image of continuity after a reign marked by conflict. Henry, King of the Romans since his election in 1169, stands as the recognized successor within the imperial order. Conrad, Duke of Swabia, receives honor that places him within the same dynastic picture. Their positions do not remove the practical difficulties of succession, nor guarantee obedience from every prince. Nevertheless, their appearance beside Frederick allows the court to imagine time extending forward in an orderly line. The sons are not simply guests at Mainz, they are part of the festival's political architecture. Before sunrise, the air above the Rhine is cool enough to sharpen every sound. A bucket touches the side of a well, ropes strain, and water rises with a muted splash. A groom brushes mud from a horse's legs, while another folds an embroidered covering over a rail. The fabric releases a faint scent of lanolin and rain. In the kitchens, coals awaken beneath iron grates, and the first loaves begin to brown. Rushes are swept across the crowded floors, replacing yesterday's damp layer with a cleaner covering. Beyond the roofs, the river meadows gather a colorless light that slowly becomes green. The Mainz gathering begins on 20 May 1184, during Pentecost, and its timing gives the festival a sacred as well as political setting. The Christian calendar places the assembly within a season of renewal, while imperial ceremony gives renewal a visible human form. Frederick's court gathers princes, bishops, nobles, knights, clerics, and visitors into one ordered setting. The same men who might compete over rights, lands, and precedence now share the rituals of attendance. Their cooperation is temporary, but temporary cooperation can still accomplish important work. Judgments are heard, grants are issued, marriages are considered, oaths are exchanged, and political negotiation moves beneath the sound of celebration. The sun rises through a veil of cloud and lays a thin brightness over the green river meadows near Mainz. Water clings to the grass, and the breeze carries the cool scent of the Rhine towards the city. On the road, carts pass slowly beneath bundles of canvas and timber, their wheels clicking over stones. A horse shakes its head, sending droplets from its mane onto a nearby servant's sleeve. Fresh bread steams in a basket, and roasted meat turns above a fire where fat falls into the coals. From the far side of the camp, trumpets begin the morning's call. The court festival of Pentecost is therefore a performance of unity, though its deeper purpose is more careful and practical. Frederick must show that the empire can still gather around him after disputes have divided its leading men. The defeat of Henry, the lion, has created space for renewed order, while the peace of Constance has offered a political framework for it. Yet the ruler's success depends on continued cooperation from princes and regional powers. The festival's magnificence persuades by making authority pleasurable, memorable, and visible. It allows political accommodation to appear as shared celebration rather than reluctant necessity. Around the pavilions, the last traces of rain shine on ropes, wagon boards, and polished leather. The banners are brighter after washing, their colors lifting against a pale blue opening in the cloud. Wooden barriers stand in rows across the field, worn smooth where hands have rested during the contests. A faint scent of trampled grass rises under the warmth of the morning. Musicians carry instruments between the shelters, and the low testing of strings blends with the ringing of harness. The river continues its slow passage beyond the meadows, indifferent to the ranking of men gathered beside it. In the years that follow, the memory of Mainz grows larger than the event itself. The festival is remembered as a moment when Frederick's household, his dynasty, and the political elite of the empire appeared perfectly aligned. The imperial court's ceremonial order gave every person a place, and that arrangement seemed to reveal the shape of the whole realm. The Diet of Mainz became one of the clearest examples of 12th century imperial splendor, a scene of tournaments, processions, hospitality, and carefully measured honor. Its later image is brilliant because it gathers so many forms of power into one remembered frame. The afternoon light rests on the broad surface of the Rhine, where small ripples break the reflection of the sky. Along the banks, willow leaves turn their pale undersides towards the wind, and reeds whisper in narrow clusters. The smell of rain has faded, leaving damp soil, horse sweat, and wood smoke close to the ground. In a shaded corner, a servant mends a torn strap, while another folds a blue cloth marked with a household emblem. The clatter of wooden barriers has ceased, but loose boards knock softly whenever the wind passes. A thin melody rises from the city and disappears over the water. The splendor of Mainz does not mean that Frederick has created a completely unified empire. The political order remains dependent upon regional powers, personal loyalties, ecclesiastical influence, and the willingness of princes to cooperate. A magnificent assembly can display harmony without abolishing disagreement. The visible hierarchy of the court provides a language through which differences may be managed, while the festival offers opportunities for compromise unavailable on a battlefield. Frederick's achievement lies partly in bringing opposing interests into one ceremonial space. The harmony is real while it lasts, but it remains the harmony of people who retain their own lands, ambitions, and memories. The evening meal is served beneath cloth that darkens as another shower passes overhead. Rain taps on temporary pavilions, while the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread fills the sheltered air. Cups shine briefly in the firelight, and the rushes beneath the tables become soft with dampness and spilled drink. Beyond the opening of the tent, horses stand quietly beneath embroidered coverings, their sides rising and falling. A trumpet sounds from the city wall, followed by the muted response of another instrument near the river. The world narrows to warmth, fabric, quiet conversation, and the steady patter above. At Mainz, Frederick stands at the center of a moving political household that has traveled through royal and episcopal centers for years. His power is not housed in one immovable palace, but carried in wagons, charters, vestments, provisions, weapons, and human memory. The household's movement allows the emperor to meet the empire within its own geography. At the court festival of Pentecost, that mobile form of government reaches an especially rich expression. The court seems settled because so much has arrived together, though its splendor depends upon the ability to move again when the next obligation calls. Beyond the sleeping tents, the river meadows are silver beneath the moon. The grass bends in narrow paths made by servants, animals, and returning guests. Clouds pass over the light, and the meadow darkens without losing its shape. A loose pennant brushes against a pole, producing a faint cloth sound that repeats at irregular intervals. The horses are mostly quiet now, though one stamps and another pulls at its rope. From a distant house comes the smell of ashes and wet timber. The Rhine carries the night onwards, bearing reflections that break and join again. The magnificent festival becomes a still point before Frederick's final journey. In 1184, the emperor is seen at the height of his worldly authority, surrounded by princes, bishops, nobles, knights, clerics, visitors, and members of his family. Henry and Conrad stand within the celebration, and the dynastic future appears secure beneath the ceremony. The tournaments turn danger into display, while hospitality turns political necessity into fellowship. Banners, textiles, horses, food, music, and ordered seating transform Mainz into an image of imperial fullness. For a while, the empire seems to gather itself around one center without strain. Morning returns quietly over Mainz, touching the wet roofs and pale edges of the pavilions. The rushes are flattened where many people have walked, and fragments of straw cling to the hems of traveling cloaks. Cooks carry bread from the ovens, while smoke rises in a thin column before the breeze divides it. Horses are led towards the river, their hooves sounding softly on the damp road. The green meadows brighten beyond the camp, and small birds settle among the reeds. A final trumpet note crosses the open ground, clear enough to be heard, gentle enough to vanish. The most brilliant public image of Frederick's reign comes only 6 years before his death, and the interval gives the memory of Mainz a quiet irony. The Diet of Mainz in 1184 presents an emperor surrounded by order, prosperity, dynastic promise, and the gathered dignity of the empire. Yet the splendor is also a moment, held briefly between journeys, obligations, conflicts, and the uncertainties of human life. The court festival of Pentecost remains luminous because it appears complete, though the political world beneath it is never entirely still. Frederick's authority shines most clearly at Mainz, just before time begins to carry him elsewhere. On 10 June 1190, you are traveling beside the Saleph, on the long road towards Jerusalem, beneath the brilliant heat of the Cilician summer. The old Emperor Frederick approaches the river with an army that has crossed Hungary, the Byzantine Empire, and Anatolia. You see the standards moving slowly through dust, while horses lower their heads and men watch the water with tired attention. Frederick, who took the cross after Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade, has endured difficult roads, shortages, negotiations, and the uncertainty of foreign rulers. Ahead lies Cilicia, and beyond Cilicia lies the Holy Land. The river seems only another obstacle between the emperor and his distant purpose. Yet the Saleph has gathered speed between the rocks, and its cold current runs beneath the brightness like a hidden force. The water flashes white beneath the sun, breaking over stones polished by countless seasons. Around you, leather straps creak against saddles, while dust lies in a pale film over cloaks, boots, and uncovered hands. The air smells of sweat, dry grass, and the warm hides of exhausted animals. A few soldiers stand near the bank, their shadows short beneath the high light. The river carries a sharp mineral scent, strangely fresh after the road through Anatolia. Its surface looks inviting from a distance, yet the current gathers power where the banks draw close. You hear the rush of mountain water without being able to distinguish its separate movements. Somewhere behind the column, a mule gives a low, uncertain call, and a loose piece of harness taps softly against a wooden pack frame. The accounts do not agree about what happened next, and that disagreement has remained part of the river's darkness. One report presents Frederick as swimming, perhaps entering the water to escape the oppressive heat. Another describes him bathing, as though the emperor paused for relief after the long march. A further account says that he attempted to cross on horseback, trusting the animal and the current to carry him safely towards the opposite bank. You can imagine the scene without resolving it completely. The elderly ruler moves near the Saleph, surrounded by men who have followed him across half a continent. Then the horse loses its footing, or the current catches the swimmer, or the river closes over a body that has suddenly vanished. Frederick dies in the Saleph near Seleucia in Cilician Armenia before reaching the Holy Land. Cold water strikes with a force that the bright afternoon has concealed. The shock travels through cloth, leather, and skin, while the current pulls at every loose edge. Beneath the surface, stones blur in the turbulence, appearing and disappearing in green and silver. A horse may struggle against the riverbed, its breath loud and frightened, while hands reach towards a rider whose weight has become difficult to hold. The banks offer little shelter, rising unevenly among gravel, scrub, and exposed roots. Above the water, the mountains remain indifferent, their slopes holding the sun in long, pale bands. The rush of the Saleph continues without pause, and the sound seems too large for one human death. Even before the soldiers understand what has occurred, the river has carried the emperor into uncertainty. You remain with the army after Frederick disappears, and the first response is not legend, but confusion. Men search the banks, call across the water, and stare at the current as though a familiar figure might return upon its surface. The crusading host has been organized around the presence of its ruler, whose age, authority, and reputation have held together many difficult arrangements. Now the center is gone. The army that began its march from Regensburg on 11 May 1189 has suddenly lost the man who gave its movement political meaning. You remember the earlier disaster of 1187, when Saladin defeated the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and captured Jerusalem. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade after that catastrophe, and Frederick took the cross for the expedition. Now the expedition must continue without him. A temporary camp gathers beneath the hard afternoon sky, though it does not feel like a place of rest. Cloaks hang heavily from shoulders, and bridles lie coiled beside saddles that no one has yet prepared for the evening. The smell of leather, sweat, and dust settles over the camp, mixed with smoke from fires that burn without warmth. Mourning is muffled, because the army has not yet found a settled form for its grief. Voices remain low, and the usual calls between servants and soldiers become brief, practical sounds. Beyond the tents comes the steady motion of the Saleph, still bright where the sun reaches it. A raven calls once over the distant slopes, then falls silent. In the fading heat, the river seems to contain both the emperor's absence and the road that remains. You follow the survivors as they attempt to preserve the expedition's purpose. Some of Frederick's followers abandon the crusade after the emperor's death, unable to imagine the enterprise without the ruler who had gathered them. Others continue towards Antioch and Acre, carrying news that will move through camps, courts, and fortified towns. The army's route has already passed through Hungary, the Byzantine Empire, and Anatolia, and every stage has demanded patience, supplies, and repeated negotiation. At Iconium in May 1190, Frederick defeated the forces of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum outside the city, proving that his army could still impose its will upon a dangerous landscape. Yet victory at Iconium cannot answer the question raised by the Saleph. The crusade continues towards Cilicia, while the emperor remains behind in the water. Evening arrives slowly over the camp, bringing thin relief from the heat. The road has left a crust of dust along every seam of clothing, and the animals stand with their heads lowered beneath the darkening sky. Small fires send narrow threads of smoke across the tents, where men sit close together and speak of the emperor in fragments. Someone cleans a sword without looking at the blade, while another folds a cloak that will no longer be needed by its owner. Beyond the camp, water strikes stone with a cold, repeating sound. The warmth of the day remains in the ground, but the river exhales a chill that reaches the nearest fires. No song rises among the soldiers, and even the horses seem to understand that ordinary travel has been interrupted. You then enter the older problem, which begins when the river has taken a body and leaves behind a question of burial. Several reports describe different attempts to treat Frederick's remains, and the accounts do not settle into one agreed sequence. His flesh may have been buried at Tarsus, while his bones were carried onward towards Antioch. Other traditions place different portions of the body in different locations, following the practical customs of medieval travel and the urgent needs of the army. You encounter no single tomb that closes the story with certainty. The precise, final burial place remains uncertain, and that uncertainty matters because Frederick was not an ordinary pilgrim lost on a distant road. He was a powerful, elderly ruler whose body carried the visible burden of empire. The imagined burial places are far from the bright riverbank, yet each one seems touched by the same dry light. Stone chambers hold the smell of dust, incense, and damp earth, while hurried hands prepare remains according to reports that later writers repeat with varying confidence. A coffin can become a vessel of memory as much as a container for the dead. Bones may travel with the army, wrapped in cloth and protected from the road, while the living continue through heat and scarcity. In Antioch, the air would carry the sense of cooking fires, animals, and river mud from the Orontes. In Cilicia, the mountains would remain close, their slopes holding the afternoon shadows. Everywhere, the absent emperor would be spoken of as though his presence had been divided among places. You sense why the death created more than a political problem. Frederick's disappearance removed a leader, altered command, weakened the German contingent, and disturbed the practical machinery of the crusade. Yet it also produced a vacuum of meaning, because the journey had been built around a ruler whose long life seemed to connect generations of imperial expectation. The emperor had crossed the Danube lands, passed through Byzantine territory, negotiated with rulers in Anatolia, and defeated the Seljuk forces outside Iconium. His progress gave shape to the Crusade's difficult geography. At the Saleph, that shape broke apart. The event was too sudden for explanation, too public for quiet forgetting, and too incomplete for a single authoritative memory. The river supplied an ending, but not a conclusion. Night settles over the Cilician road, and the stars appear above the dark outline of the mountains. In the camp, mourning remains close to the body, though the body itself may already be moving towards another place. A folded banner rests beside a tent, its fabric still holding the warmth of the day. Ash trembles in the fire, and a faint wind passes through ropes, branches, and unfastened cloth. You hear boots crossing the earth, then the soft clink of a cup placed upon a stone. The Saleph is colder now, concealed beneath darkness, but its course can still be followed by sound. Every few moments, the river breaks against a rock with a hollow note. The army sleeps unevenly, and the road towards Antioch waits beyond the embers. You turn back across the years to the beginning of the expedition. Frederick's decision to take the cross transformed an appeal into a vast German movement. On 11 May 1189, he began the march from Regensburg, where roads, river crossings, and political borders opened before the host. You travel with him through Hungary, where supplies and passage require care, then through the Byzantine Empire, where every agreement carries the possibility of delay. Anatolia brings heat, shortages, difficult roads, and negotiations that must be repeated whenever the army reaches a new power. The march towards Jerusalem is therefore already a history of endurance before it becomes a story of drowning. Morning on the road comes with pale light spreading across trampled grass. Saddles are tightened, packs are lifted, and the scent of damp leather briefly replaces the harsher odor of dust. Water skins pass from hand to hand, never quite full enough for the day ahead. The sun rises over ridges whose colors shift from gray to brown and then to a dry, muted green. You feel grit beneath your fingers when you touch the reins, and fine dust settles upon the eyelashes. Ahead, the road narrows between stones, while behind, the column stretches into a wavering line of men and animals. The sound of wheels, hooves, and armor becomes a single restrained movement. Heat gathers over the path, promising another day in which distance will be purchased slowly. You are standing in a different landscape now, beneath the wooded slopes of the Kiffiusa, a small mountain ranged south of the Harz in central Germany. The name belongs not to one towering peak, but to a long, irregular rise of forest, stone, and open ground. At the Kulpenberg, the Kiffiusa reaches about 473, 6 meters, modest in height yet powerful in memory. The slopes hold beech and oak, with wind moving through their branches in a sound that resembles distant water. Exposed gypsum breaks through the earth in pale surfaces, chalky beneath the hand and bright beneath a thin winter sun. Ruined walls mark the remains of a castle, while deep stone wells descend into darkness. A raven calls over the broken masonry, and its voice travels through the woodland before returning as a faint echo. The mountain does not reveal its secret immediately, because the legend of Frederick sleeping inside the Kiffiusa developed gradually. It was not simply an eyewitness belief carried intact from the Saleph in 1190. Between the river and the mountain lay generations of retelling, political change, local tradition, and the human wish to give an unfinished death a hidden continuation. Medieval traditions of mountain disappearance, known as Bergentrukang, imagined exceptional figures continuing to live beneath the earth. Kings, heroes, and rulers could be withdrawn from ordinary history, sleeping in chambers that opened only at an appointed hour. You enter this imagination slowly, leaving behind the uncertain burial reports and the missing tomb. Frederick does not return as a man rescued from the river. He becomes a sovereign concealed within stone, waiting beneath the landscape. The woodland around the Kiffiusa changes with each season, though the old paths remain marked by roots and pale fragments of rock. In summer, leaves layer the air with a green darkness, and warm resin rises from branches rubbed by passing shoulders. In autumn, dry foliage moves across the ground like a quiet tide, covering stones and revealing them again beneath your feet. Winter exposes the structure of the slopes, the twisted limbs, and the pale faces of gypsum among the roots. Moisture gathers in cracks near the ruins, where moss softens the hard edges of fallen blocks. The smell of damp caves rises from wells and hollows, carrying a coolness that does not belong to the open air. Above the walls, the raven calls once more, far away and patient. You find the emperor beneath the mountain in the form later storytellers give him. Frederick sits at a stone table in a chamber below the Kiffiusa, still alive, still waiting, and still marked by the red beard associated with his image. The beard grows through the stone table, binding the sleeping ruler to the material world around him. This detail is strange enough to remain visible in the mind, turning an absent emperor into a physical presence that can be imagined in darkness. The red beard is no longer merely a feature of an elderly man who traveled towards the Saleph. It becomes a thread passing through stone and time. You picture Frederick seated beneath the earth, surrounded by silence, while the upper world changes beyond his chamber. Within the mountain, the air is cool against the face and heavy with the scent of wet stone. Water gathers somewhere beyond the chamber, falling in slow drops whose rhythm is almost lost beneath the thickness of the rock. The table feels rough and cold beneath the hand, powdered with pale grit from the surrounding gypsum. Narrow cracks carry faint currents of air, bringing the smell of roots, leaves, and rain from the woodland above. No fire burns in the cavern, yet the darkness seems to contain a dull red impression, as though the emperor's beard retains the color of vanished banners. Dust rests upon the floor without showing any clear footprint. Far overhead, wind moves through the Kifhiusa trees, while the cave keeps its own deeper silence. You hear the legend say that the sleeping emperor will awaken when Germany needs him. His return will restore a lost golden age, bringing order to a land that has been divided, uncertain, or burdened by foreign pressure. The mountain therefore becomes more than a hiding place. It becomes a chamber of expectation, where the past is preserved in readiness for a future rescue. Frederick's death before he reached the Holy Land is transformed into a postponement. The river no longer represents final disappearance alone, because the emperor has been carried beneath the earth. His absence becomes proof that he may return. In this form, the Kifhiusa story answers the uncertainty of 1190 with a promise that no burial account could provide. The emperor is lost, but not entirely gone. Outside the cave, the sky changes over the small range, and shadows move along the wooded ridges. Low cloud settles above the Kulpenberg, hiding its height, and then revealing it in patches of grey light. Rain darkens the exposed gypsum, turning pale stone into a surface of silver and brown. Water runs beside the ruined walls, collecting in shallow channels before disappearing among roots. The air smells of wet leaves and old masonry. A raven crosses the open space above the castle, its wings almost silent as it passes between broken towers. Beneath the trees, the path becomes soft and uneven, while the wells remain black and still. The Kifhiusa offers no visible sign of an emperor, only the patient materials from which a legend can be made. You watch the red beard pass from a physical feature into a visual image beneath the mountain. The historical Frederick had an aging face, an imperial reputation, and a body whose final treatment was recorded in conflicting reports. The legendary Frederick has no ordinary decay, because sleep preserves him outside the usual reach of time. His beard grows, yet he does not weaken. The stone table supports him, yet the chamber does not become a grave. The image gathers strength precisely because it remains impossible. It allows the emperor to be both dead and present, both ancient and ready, both removed from history and capable of correcting it. Through the red beard, a confusing death becomes a picture that can be carried from one generation to another. The cavern seems deeper when imagined beneath the weather of the upper world. Moisture beads upon the stone and gathers along the edge of the table, making small dark marks upon the floor. The walls are uneven, layered, and chalky, with mineral surfaces that catch the faintest suggestion of light. Roots may press through a ceiling far above, while insects move unseen in cracks between the blocks. The cool air rests upon the skin, and the smell of damp caves becomes almost sweet after the dry dust of the crusading road. You hear no army here, no hoofbeats, and no commands from a distant camp. Only the slow movement of water suggests that time continues. The emperor's silence is not empty. It is held inside the mountain like a guarded breath. You then follow the legend into the 19th century, when the Kifhiusa became especially important amid German nationalism and hopes for national unity. Frederick's sleeping presence offered an image of continuity for people living among political divisions and competing states. The emperor beneath the mountain could be imagined as the guardian of an older Germany, waiting until the scattered land required a single symbolic center. The lost golden age belonged partly to medieval memory and partly to modern longing. You see how the later myth reshaped the meaning of the Saleph. Frederick had died through circumstances that remained unclear, and his final tomb could not be identified with confidence. The Kifhiusa supplied a tomb that was not a tomb, preserving the ruler as a promise rather than closing him within a settled grave. Wind passes through the woodland above the imagined chamber, bending branches in long, irregular movements. Leaves brush against one another with a dry whisper, then fall quiet when the gust moves beyond the ridge. In the ruins, cold air collects between stones that once belonged to walls, towers, and rooms now open to the sky. Pale gypsum shines beside dark soil, while moss gathers in sheltered joints. The scent of rain remains among the trees, mingling with the mineral damp rising from underground passages. Somewhere beyond the castle, a raven calls across the valley, and the sound is answered by nothing. The mountain appears small against the wider country, yet its shadows extend through stories far larger than its height. Evening begins beneath the branches, softening every edge. You return once more to 10 June 1190, because the legend can never fully erase the river. Frederick was approaching the Saleph on the road towards Jerusalem, after the German army had crossed difficult regions and negotiated its passage through unfamiliar lands. He had reached Iconium in May 1190 and defeated the Seljuk forces outside the city, carrying the army forward through Anatolia towards Cilicia. Then the water intervened. Whether he was swimming, bathing, or attempting to cross on horseback remains uncertain, and the sources differ over the precise circumstances of his drowning. His death occurred before he reached the Holy Land. Some followers left the crusade, while others continued towards Antioch and Acre. The facts remain plain, yet their arrangement refuses to become simple. The river at dawn would have carried a different light from the afternoon of Frederick's death. Mist might have rested above the banks, though the stones would still have held the night's coldness beneath the rising heat. In the shallows, water would have moved quickly around ankles and hooves, pressing against the legs with surprising force. Leather would have darkened where splashed, and dust would have become mud upon the hems of cloaks. The mountains would have reflected broken strips of gold, while the deeper channels remained green and shadowed. You would hear birds waking among thorn bushes, followed by the clatter of a camp beginning its day. Nothing in the landscape would announce that an emperor had vanished there. The Saleph would simply continue towards the sea. You understand why the later mountain was needed by memory. A powerful elderly ruler had vanished in a foreign river, and no precise tomb could gather the scattered reports into certainty. The crusade continued, but its original center had been removed. Political explanations could describe the consequences, and burial accounts could preserve fragments of the body, yet neither could restore the sense of direction lost beside the Saleph. The Kifiyusa legend transformed that confusing death into a promise that the emperor had not truly vanished. It allowed absence to become waiting, uncertainty to become concealment, and grief to become a future possibility. The mountain did not solve the historical problem. It gave the problem a shape in which longing could remain alive. Cold darkness gathers beneath the stone, while the last daylight fades across the wooded Kifiyusa slopes. The cavern walls hold moisture in their pores, and the floor remains powdered with pale dust. A faint current moves through the chamber, carrying the scent of roots and rain from the world above. Somewhere within the mountain, water drops into a hidden hollow, one quiet sound following another. The red beard lies against the stone table, bright only in imagination, while the emperor remains motionless in his impossible sleep. Above him, the ruins darken, the woodland stirs, and a raven crosses the empty sky. Far away, the Saleph continues its course through Cilicia, keeping the memory of 10 June 1190 in the movement of its cold water.